During the great boom of the romance fantasy genre, she reads a book titled The Promise of the World Tree. The story revolves around a couple who overthrow a tyrant and seize the imperial throne, intertwined with a touch of sweet romance. Among its many characters, there is also an insignificant side figure named Lilith, who is unjustly executed after being swept up in a political conspiracy. Now, the female protagonist finds herself reincarnated as that very Lilith. She can hardly believe that she has become the female lead of an isekai story. However, she has no interest in making Lilith's family regret the way they treated her. Her father, who claims that his wife died giving birth to Lilith, considers her nothing, which only makes her question how any of that could possibly be Lilith's fault. She also feels no obligation to fall in love with Lilith's fiancé. Since she is now living this life, she decides that she might as well live however she wants. After running away from home, she enrolls in the academy. She completes her undergraduate studies, continues on to earn a master's degree, and pushes herself relentlessly through years of hard work. At last, she believes she has finally achieved her freedom after exhausting herself academically. However, just as she reaches that point, someone calls out to her, pleading for her to save the empire. They explain that the leaves of the World Tree have turned yellow. The World Tree itself throws a tantrum, complaining that it had clearly demanded to be given nothing but rainwater created from the purest morning dew. Meanwhile, others cry out desperately, insisting that if the World Tree dies, they will perish along with it. The tree, in its fury, declares that everything might as well go extinct. The people insist that only she has the power to save the empire. Despite their pleas, she inwardly dismisses them, thinking that she is getting out of this situation no matter what. Yet at that very moment, someone appears and questions where she thinks she is going, pointing out that she seems to be leaving without him. This causes her to wonder how things have ended up like this. All the while, the World Tree continues to lash out impatiently, demanding that she hurry and bring the rainwater, as it complains of its overwhelming thirst. The manhwa opens with a girl standing before the World Tree, its towering presence dominating the scene. Around her, people murmur in astonishment as they observe that the leaves of the World Tree have begun to recover their color. They remark among themselves that professionals truly are different, wondering whether she possesses some kind of secret method. The female protagonist, however, only chuckles inwardly, thinking that if they insist on calling it a secret, then perhaps it is simply her ability to communicate directly with the tree. The tree, for its part, immediately demands that she bring it water. Enduring its constant complaints proves to be incredibly difficult for her, as it orders her around all day like a spoiled brat. The tree reiterates that it is thirsty, and although she smiles calmly, she explains that she had already brought it water throughout the entire night. The tree dismisses her efforts, insisting that what she provided was not even enough to nourish a single leaf. Naturally, it demands more. In response, she suggests installing a proper water supply system so that it can have access to water whenever it needs it. She reasons that if she were to request it from the imperial family, they would surely arrange for it without hesitation. The tree, however, reacts dramatically, claiming that in that case it might as well wither away like a pitiful, helpless tree, declaring that everyone should simply perish together. This outburst causes the surrounding people to panic, shouting that the World Tree is withering, a disastrous sign given that the entire continent understands that the world itself is on the brink of destruction. This is the story of poor Lilith, who only ever wished to live a peaceful life. Overwhelmed, she finally relents and declares that she will fetch the water for the tree. The empire in which this unfolds has a 1,000-year-long history on the continent, founded upon the legend of the World Tree. For ducal houses serve as the pillars of this empire, and among them is House No La. It is into this family that the youngest daughter, Lilith, is born. However, tragedy strikes when the Duchess loses her life during a difficult childbirth. Devastated by the loss of his beloved wife, the Duke begins to despise his youngest daughter. As a result, Lilith becomes the black sheep of the family. She lives quietly, remaining out of everyone's sight and never causing trouble. Despite her efforts to stay unnoticed, she is eventually swept up in a political struggle involving her fiancé's family. She is falsely accused of causing the World Tree to wither, and in a cruel twist of fate, she is pitifully burned to death. That is the entirety of Lilith's role in the original novel. The protagonist cannot help but question why she had to reincarnate as such a tragic and insignificant side character. Determined to escape that miserable fate, she resolves to work harder than ever. As for the fiancé, she dismisses him entirely, thinking that he can burn for all she cares, as those matters no longer concern her. Through relentless effort and dedication to her studies, she manages to carve out her own path to freedom. In her new life, she becomes a doctor of horticulture, living in a small town in the far south of the continent. There, she establishes her horticultural research center, the only one of its kind in the entire empire. In the present, she is seen rising to her feet as the people around her greet her with cheerful good mornings. Even when she arrives at work still dressed in her pajamas after barely sleeping, no one dares to scold her. For her, it is undeniable proof that leaving that oppressive household behind was worth any cost. Morning unfolds with quiet routine until Gina suddenly appears, offering a greeting that startles Lilith and immediately draws her irritation. She reminds her, as she always does, not to sneak up on her like that. Gina, unfazed by the interruption, continues on with her duties and announces that she will now read through the pending tasks for the day. One by one, the requests begin to stack. Baron Kyle has booked an appointment. Distressed over his beloved tree now plagued by pests, the Southern Norman Women's Society has formally requested 100 flower breads, and Mount Olga has sent word asking for an emergency visit, claiming its condition has taken a grave turn. Lilith, with her usual indifference toward urgency, initially instructs that even such matters should follow proper procedure and be scheduled like any other request. Yet Gina leans in and quietly reminds her of a promise and offer of particularly fine gold tied to the emergency visit. That single detail shifts Lilith's stance at once, and she orders Gina to begin preparations for that task immediately. The flow of updates continues as Gina mentions Viscount Chelsea, who reports success in breeding his plant thanks to Lilith's guidance and intends to visit soon to express his gratitude personally. Lilith dismisses the notion outright, insisting that such formalities are unnecessary and suggesting Gina handle it instead. Gina, though unsurprised, cannot help but remark on Lilith's peculiar nature. This prompts a sharp reaction, as Lilith demands to know what exactly she has done to earn such a label. Gina explains that Lilith is fully aware of how nobles use gestures of gratitude to curry favor, yet she consistently turns them away without hesitation. Lilith, in turn, rebukes Gina for speaking so familiarly, warning her not to call her by such casual terms. Still, Gina presses on, questioning why someone so mindful of money would refuse gifts beyond her standard service fees. That question stirs a familiar reflection within Lilith, who recalls, almost automatically, the reason she entered the academy at the tender age of 12. Gina answers it before she can fully articulate it herself. It was to gain independence from her family. Lilith confirms this with certainty. By imperial law, those who earn a degree are granted rights that stand beyond the influence of family or age. That law became her lifeline. She studied relentlessly, as though her very survival depended on it, and in the span of 6 grueling years, she secured her bachelor's, master's, and doctoral degrees in horticulture. Every ounce of effort was driven by her desire for freedom. Gina responds with a familiar mix of exasperation and admiration, acknowledging that she has heard this story countless times. She even adds that Lilith chose horticulture precisely because it is an unpopular field among nobles, making it easier to avoid their entanglements. Lilith remarks dryly that Gina knows her too well, calling her the most trusted person at her side, though she adds with a hint of sarcasm that even their dog would have memorized this story by now given how often it has been repeated. Moving past the repetition, Lilith reflects on her current life with quiet satisfaction. She has no desire to entertain nobles who seek to ingratiate themselves under the guise of gratitude. Instead, she intends to live a long, humble life supported solely by the modest service fees she collects. She has already severed her engagement to avoid what she once believed would lead to an early death, and she has established her research center in the countryside, far removed from the palace and its suffocating influence. All that remains, in her mind, is to continue living peacefully and without disturbance. That fragile sense of calm is interrupted when Gina apologetically mentions that there is one final letter to address. Lilith attempts to dismiss it, urging Gina to handle it on her own, but Gina insists that she cannot, for the letter bears the seal of the imperial palace. The mere mention of it leaves Lilith in disbelief. Reluctantly, she is told she must read it herself. The contents are as alarming as they are unexpected. The palace urgently requests her services as a gardener, offering shockingly high success fees and awaiting her immediate reply. More unsettling still is the strict confidentiality clause. Any disclosure of the letter's contents will result in the immediate execution of her family. A heavy silence settles between Lilith and Gina as they exchange glances, both silently agreeing that they have seen nothing at all. Lilith quickly concludes that the safest course of action is to refuse outright and begins to consider drafting a response immediately. Then doubt creeps in, and she wonders if it would be better to return the letter directly to the palace instead. Unfortunately, the post office is likely closed yet again, a recurring inconvenience that seems to plague her whenever she needs it most. With a sigh, she decides she will simply go in person and send it via express delivery. She instructs Gina to prepare the carriage without delay. However, the moment Lilith opens the door, her plans unravel. A man stands waiting just outside, as though he has been there all along. He greets her with familiarity, remarking that it has been a while and that his timing could not be more perfect, as he has come specifically to escort her. Before he can finish his sentence, Lilith abruptly shuts the door in his face. Inside, her thoughts spiral as she questions whether what she saw is real. Standing on the other side of that door is the very person she once identified as the deciding factor in her early demise, the fiancé she had so carefully cast aside to secure her freedom. Adrian has returned, and his presence alone threatens to unravel everything she has built. As the weight of this realization settles in, she cannot help but wonder what fate now awaits their already troubled household. Lilith gathers herself and opens the door once more, stepping outside with measured composure. Adrian immediately remarks that she has finally come out, admitting that for a moment he suspected she might be avoiding him. His presence looms large, not merely as an unexpected visitor but as a man of immense stature. He is the head of House Arkshad, the commander of the Imperial Guard, and the only younger brother of the Empress. To the world, he is nothing short of a hero of the Empire. To Lilith, however, he represents something far more dangerous. She addresses him with careful politeness, insisting that she would never dare to avoid someone of his standing. Beneath her calm exterior, her thoughts churn. In the original story, the one she now finds herself trapped within, Adrian is not just a decorated figure of authority but also her destined husband. More importantly, he is the very catalyst of her downfall, a living, breathing trigger for the chain of events that leads to her death. To Lilith, he is less a man and more a ticking time bomb, and every moment spent near him feels like standing too close to an inevitable explosion. Determined to create distance, she questions what a man of his status could possibly be doing in such a remote countryside. Adrian answers without hesitation, explaining that he has come personally to escort her and ensure her safe journey to the palace. The mention of the palace strikes her like a bolt, shattering her composure as she reacts with open shock. She demands to know why she would ever go there, reminding him that, as a member of the Academy, she is unaffiliated with palace affairs. Adrian's response is calm but probing, asking whether she truly did not receive the letter. Lilith immediately denies it, her refusal swift and firm. Yet Adrian continues, adding that if her concern lies with leaving her research center unattended, the matter has already been arranged. The palace's head gardener will assume her responsibilities in her absence. That statement unsettles her further, and she pushes back, questioning why they would summon her with such urgency if they already have someone for the role. The moment the words leave her mouth, realization dawns. Adrian points out the inconsistency with quiet precision. She claims not to have received the letter, yet she speaks as though she knows its contents. That single misstep seals her fate. Before she can recover, the situation has already slipped beyond her control, and soon enough, she finds herself seated inside the carriage. The countryside she worked so hard to retreat into begins to fade behind her. A quiet frustration settles in as she reflects on how thoroughly she has been cornered. She had believed she had done everything possible to distance herself from the palace and the dangerous currents of power that flow within it. Yet despite all her efforts, she has been drawn back in. There is, at least, a small comfort. Gina, her most trusted companion, accompanies her on this unwanted journey. Even so, Lilith knows better than to relax. Now that events have reached this point, she cannot afford even a moment of carelessness. Her guard must remain firmly in place. The story she has transmigrated into is far from a gentle tale. It is steeped in darkness, woven with bitter rivalries and ruthless ambition. At its center stands a tyrant, power-hungry, incompetent, and consumed by an inferiority complex toward the male lead, who is of his own blood, and toward the female lead, who is bound to the male lead by engagement. Driven by paranoia and resentment, the tyrant attempts to eliminate them both, fabricating charges of conspiracy to justify their deaths. Yet, as is often the case in such stories, fate favors the protagonists. They survive every scheme laid against them, enduring until the very end, where they overthrow the tyrant and ascend the throne as the new emperor and empress. That marks the conclusion of the story's first arc. What follows is no less perilous: the rise of political among the remaining factions, each vying for influence in the shifting balance of power. It is within this volatile period that Lilith's own role becomes truly dire. She is fated to be framed as the one responsible for the destruction of the World Tree, a crime so grave that it ensures her downfall. The main character reflects that this moment unfolds not long after she has ascended to the throne, a realization that brings her a fragile sense of relief. It means there is still time to avoid the grim fate that once awaited her as the falsely accused destroyer of the World Tree. She reminds herself that she must remain optimistic, even as the weight of her memories presses heavily upon her. Yet her forced optimism does not go unnoticed. Adrian, seated nearby, studies her with quiet concern, his curiosity piqued by the frequency of her sighs. The journey to the palace is already tense enough, but Adrian's behavior only deepens her discomfort. He hovers attentively, offering to activate the carriage stabilizer at the slightest hint of unease, asking whether she feels cold and suggesting he increase the heater, and even presenting snacks he has carefully prepared. His demeanor resembles that of an overly eager, anxious companion, and she cannot help but feel unsettled. This is not the Adrian she remembers from the novel, a man who had once carried himself with a colder, more distant air. Attempting to steady herself, she assures him that she is perfectly fine. However, there is a question lingering in her mind, one she cannot suppress any longer. She wonders about the true reason the palace has summoned a gardener. Adrian's response is disarmingly simple, offering nothing beyond a vague dismissal. His answer only heightens her suspicion, confirming what she already senses, that the letter she received was hastily written, its purpose concealed beneath layers of ulterior intent. Adrian eventually elaborates, attributing the summons to the condition of the world tree. At the mention of it, her thoughts sharpen instantly. She questions whether he truly refers to that world tree, the primordial creation said to have existed since the dawn of time, a transcendental entity that connects every region of the continent. It is a crystallized mass of ancient mana, taking the form of an immense and sacred tree. Adrian confirms her understanding without hesitation. The implication strikes her with chilling clarity. The significance of the world tree, combined with her own precarious situation, forms a conclusion she cannot ignore. It spells certain doom if she is not careful. She wonders aloud, though her thoughts remain inward, why magicians or priests are not handling the matter, as they traditionally oversee such sacred phenomena. Adrian explains that all known methods have already been attempted, yet none have succeeded in restoring the tree's health. That failure is precisely why they have turned to her, the empire's youngest doctor of horticulture. Internally, she spirals at the reminder of her own accomplishments, cursing the distinction that has now made her indispensable in the worst possible way. Adrian attempts to reassure her, describing the task as little more than a formality and insisting there is no need for anxiety. He adds that during her stay at the palace, he will serve as her personal escort, remaining constantly by her side to ensure her comfort and safety. Ironically, his promise only intensifies her unease, for he is the very source of her greatest concern. At last, the carriage arrives at the palace. Stepping out, she feels the gravity of the moment settle over her. Her gaze lifts and then widens in astonishment as she beholds the world tree in person. Its grandeur is undeniable, every inch of it radiating an otherworldly presence that justifies its status as the novel's central symbol. It is breathtaking, almost unreal in its magnificence. Yet as she studies it more closely, her trained eye begins to pick apart the details. The leaves resemble those of a broadleaf tree, though the veins appear faintly dried. No immediate external damage is visible, which only deepens the mystery. She considers the possibility that the problem lies beneath the surface, that the roots themselves may be rotting. Then, without warning, the tree reacts. A sharp, indignant sensation echoes as though the tree itself has voiced discomfort, protesting against interference. The presence addressing her seems almost sentient, accusing her of tampering and questioning whether she intends to destroy it. The words, or perhaps the feeling of them, strike with startling clarity. Lilith stands there, utterly bewildered, struggling to comprehend what she has just experienced. She stares at the towering entity before her, a single thought echoing in disbelief: there is no way the tree is actually speaking. The notion feels absurd, impossible even, yet the sensation of having heard it lingers too vividly to dismiss. Before she can process it further, Adrian approaches, his expression laced with concern as he asks whether something is wrong. She quickly composes herself and assures him that it is nothing, convincing herself that it must simply be her imagination playing tricks on her. However, the moment she attempts to ignore it, the presence resurfaces. The tree grumbles with clear irritation, addressing her in a tone that is unmistakably directed at her. It calls her the pink-haired one, questioning whether she is deliberately ignoring it and challenging her audacity. The voice, or whatever it is, carries an undeniable sharpness. At that realization, she hesitates. Perhaps she is not imagining things after all. The voice is far too distinct, far too persistent. Yet when she glances at Adrian, it becomes evident that he hears nothing. To him, there is only silence. Steadying herself, she shifts her focus and politely asks who has been responsible for maintaining the world tree until now. Adrian begins to answer, but before he can finish, another voice interrupts. Someone steps forward, announcing that they heard Adrian was looking for them. Adrian responds with mild amusement, remarking that they have arrived at just the right moment. He then introduces them as the individuals tasked with overseeing the care of the world tree, experts in their respective fields. Among them, a man wearing glasses steps forward with a composed demeanor. He greets Lilith with formal courtesy, addressing her as the young lady of House Aurelian and expressing his honor at meeting her. He introduces himself as Lennox of the Magic Tower, a name she recognizes from passing rumors. She returns the greeting politely, though she cannot help but wonder what exactly he means when he mentions having heard about her. Lennox elaborates without hesitation, explaining that she has garnered considerable attention within the palace, particularly among scholars. He describes her as someone remarkable, an individual who chose to pursue a field associated with the working class, yet rose to prominence through her own efforts without relying on her family's influence. He continues, praising her for abandoning high society to live in the countryside in pursuit of knowledge, portraying her as the embodiment of an ideal scholar. As he speaks, Lilith listens with growing disbelief. This is not at all the impression she expected him to have. More importantly, his perception of her motivations could not be further from the truth. Her so-called passion for knowledge is nothing more than a misconception. In reality, she had no grand intellectual aspiration. She simply wanted to escape her suffocating family and the rigid expectations of high society. The academy had been her refuge, and horticulture was merely a convenient choice and easy path with minimal competition. Adrian, seemingly amused by the exchange, gently nudges the head of the magic tower aside and draws the focus back to the matter at hand, prompting Lilith to ask what she needs to know. Taking the opportunity, she turns to Lennox and observes as he examines the leaves of the world tree. He comments that they appear as they always do, maintaining a fresh, golden hue, and questions whether she perceives any issue. She immediately points out that he has already identified the problem himself. The leaves are not golden, they are yellow. Lennox insists on his interpretation, but she firmly disagrees, noting that the discoloration is obvious. When he questions why that would be a problem, she finds herself momentarily at a loss, as the answer seems self-evident. There are countless issues that could arise from such a condition, but she decides to begin with the most fundamental concern. Her attention shifts to the ground beneath the tree, and her unease deepens. The soil appears alarmingly dry. With a measured tone, she asks how often the world tree is watered. Lennox responds casually, stating that it is done approximately 2 or 3 times a year. The answer stops her cold. She questions him again, unable to conceal her disbelief, asking whether he truly means not even once a week. He confirms his statement without hesitation. Pressing further, she asks about the quantity of water provided, suggesting something substantial, perhaps the volume of a swimming pool. Lennox's reply only worsens the situation. He explains that they use a single bowl of holy water. She raises her voice sharply, declaring that this is precisely why the tree remains within the estate, her tone edged with urgency and authority. Without hesitation, she demands that water be brought to her immediately, emphasizing that she herself has seen a nearby lake. The magic tower had already revealed that the water was contaminated, yet she finds it unthinkable that such polluted water would ever be used in official research. Still, she points out that if the tree had been an ordinary one, it would have withered and died long ago under such conditions. Pruning, she insists, is also necessary. Hari, startled, interjects, asking for a moment to confirm whether he has heard correctly. He questions whether she truly means pruning, cutting the branches of the world tree. Another man reacts with shock, interpreting her words as blasphemy. He insists that such an act is absolutely forbidden. Though she may be regarded highly, even admired, they cannot permit anyone to harm what they consider sacred. She meets their resistance with a fierce glare, accusing them of babbling nonsense when she is the one offering a way to save the tree. If they are truly scholars of horticulture, she demands that they act like it and bring her water without further delay. Her outburst sends them scrambling. They reluctantly agree to provide the water, though they firmly reiterate that pruning remains strictly prohibited. Adrian steps forward, offering his assistance without hesitation. Meanwhile, she reflects inwardly, wondering who could have written such a disgraceful version of events in the first place, only to realize with irritation that she herself is responsible. She acknowledges that she has developed a troubling habit of losing her temper, something that began during her doctoral studies. Yet she cannot afford calmness now, not when the original story foretells her death right before her own home. The thought alone makes restraint impossible. Amidst the chaos, the tree itself seems to speak, addressing her directly, questioning why she ignores it when it knows she can hear. But she pushes the voice aside, focusing instead on what must be done. First, she resolves, the world tree must be saved. It is already halfway to destruction, and she refuses to let it drag her to an early grave along with it. That fate will not unfold under her watch. With renewed determination, she signals that it is time to resume the work. At last, the water arrives. The men complain about the strain, their bodies aching from the effort. The butler remarks that he had been intrigued when Lennox repeatedly praised her as an extraordinary individual, yet now he finds himself unable to cooperate with her methods. To him, her actions watering the tree with polluted water and speaking of pruning seem incomprehensible. Lennox counters, insisting that such concerns are not the immediate issue. Instead, attention shifts to the top of the world tree. One of them squints, admitting his nearsightedness prevents him from seeing clearly, while another suddenly realizes that there is someone up there. Shock ripples through them as recognition dawns. It is her. Their voices rise in alarm, demanding to know what she is doing. Then they notice the object in her hand, a pair of scissors. Before they can react, she cuts through one of the branches. The moment it falls, the three men tremble violently, calling out her name in sheer terror, as though the world itself teeters on the brink of collapse. The scene shifts to the Imperial Guard barracks in the capital. Having completed her task, she pays no heed to the caretakers, who are left on the verge of fainting. Considering the magnitude of her actions, she doubts the palace will allow her to remain any longer. It seems likely she will soon be sent back south, and she begins to prepare herself for that outcome. Adrian approaches her then, asking if she has just arrived. She expresses her gratitude for his help earlier for carrying the lake water and allowing her to stay in the barracks. He responds with calm reassurance, stating that no thanks are necessary, as he is more than willing to assist. He encourages her to rest. She acknowledges his words but cannot help noticing his presence lingering outside her room. It prompts her to wonder if he has been waiting for her all this time. He explains that he has moved into the room next to hers and had simply stepped out upon hearing her approach. This revelation unsettles her. He goes on to mention, almost casually, that he had initially considered breaking down the wall between their rooms to combine the space, though he decided it might be too much for her at present. Internally, she recoils at what she perceives as an extreme and unsettling remark. His calm smile only heightens her unease, and his behavior begins to grate on her nerves. Abruptly, she reaches out and grabs his hand. Her thoughts churn with confusion and suspicion, questioning why he is being so excessively kind when their engagement has already been called off. Determined to confront the matter directly, she resolves that the two of them need to talk. They are now seated when Lilith remarks that the room is pretty. Adrian responds that he is glad it is to her liking, explaining that he put a lot of thought into it because it will be her room. He adds that if there is anything she does not like, she should not hesitate to let him know, even the smallest things, and that she could complain about anything. Yet, despite how kindly he treats her, she feels extremely uncomfortable. Adrian finally asks whether he may know what it is she wants to talk to him about. She begins by saying that, to be honest, she is not sure why he has been so kind to her. She explains that she did follow her family's wishes and became engaged to Adrian just like in the original story, but after realizing that she has transmigrated into the novel, she deliberately harms herself. She stabs herself once, lets in all the cold winter air, and takes long, cold baths. She does all of that to make Lilith's already weak body even weaker. When her father later speaks to Adrian's father, he says that it would be a serious problem if she were unable to produce an heir. Adrian's father replies that Lady Lilith must be quite heartbroken and asks that she be comforted. Eventually, when the engagement is broken off, she believes that they return to being complete strangers, yet Adrian continues treating her as if she is still his fiancée, which deeply concerns her. He replies that he does not understand why she is asking such a thing, because to him it is obvious that he is her fiancé. Lilith questions this, wondering what he means by calling himself her fiancé. He answers that 6 years ago he swore to be hers for as long as he lived, which is why he wishes to stay by her side and provide her with only the finest things. Hearing this, she abruptly stands and demands to know what he is talking about, insisting that their engagement has already been broken off. Almost immediately, she recognizes that she has become agitated without intending to, so she apologizes to Adrian and explains that she was simply shocked. He reassures her that it is all right, admitting that something has been bothering him ever since they met again, and it appears that she does not know about it. She questions what he means. He then explains that he was unable to submit their annulment request to the court. Upon hearing this, she first assumes that Adrian had been unaware that the engagement was ever called off, but then she replays his words in her mind, stunned by what he has just revealed. The annulment request, he says, was never properly delivered and was instead lost somewhere along the way. As the meaning of his words settles in her mind, confusion overwhelms her, and she cannot help but wonder what this truly means for their engagement if the annulment request was never officially processed. Adrian explains that their engagement still stands. On the day their families agreed to call it off, he is completely unaware of what is happening. When he hears about it later, he immediately goes to see his father, the previous duke. By that time, his father has already placed his signature on the form. That moment becomes the first time he ever expresses anger toward his father. As people often say, no parent can truly win against their child, so in the end, his father hands him the annulment request and tells him to carefully consider what would be best for their family. He admits that he regrets that day a little, because soon afterward, war breaks out under the tyrant. He never imagines that it will become the last time he ever sees his father. Because of everything that follows, he is ultimately unable to submit the annulment request to the records. Lilith realizes with a sinking heart that although she believes she escaped the war described in the original story, that very war becomes the reason her engagement is never officially annulled. The realization devastates her deeply. Adrian apologizes, saying that his story has become somewhat depressing. She gently reassures him that it is not, and asks him to continue. He resumes, explaining that despite everything, he is truly glad to meet her again and speak with her like this. There is a long period when he cannot go anywhere near her because he is being tracked by the tyrant's army. Even so, he wishes to return the final decision about their engagement to her, so he takes a great risk just once to visit her at the academy. Lilith questions whether he truly comes to the academy because she does not remember such a visit. He explains that it happens during winter 4 years ago. That day remains vivid in his memory because a fierce snowstorm rages outside. He recalls meeting her maid, who has accompanied her to the palace before, yet the maid shuts the door in his face, explaining that Lilith is busy with her studies. Because of that, he is unable to see her, and he cannot even deliver the letter he brings. Lilith begins to wonder whether he is referring to that very day when Jane informs her that a visitor waits outside. At the time, however, Lilith is struggling with an academic crisis and chooses not to step out. Now, as she reflects on it, she feels a surge of guilt. Even setting aside the issue of the annulment, she cannot believe that she leaves someone who risks his life just to see her standing alone in the freezing snow. Overcome with remorse, she tells him that although it is long overdue, she is truly sorry. Adrian admits that it would be a lie to claim he is not upset at the time, yet that moment now belongs to the past, so she should not worry about it anymore. What matters most to him, he says, is the future. He then rises to his feet and remarks that it is getting late, advising her to go to bed, and suggesting that they continue their conversation later. However, before he can leave, Lilith reaches out and grabs him, telling him to wait. She confesses that she does not want to sleep tonight. The scene then shifts to the palace, where someone urgently informs Her Majesty that Lady Lilith's actions are blasphemous, insisting that the heathen must be sent away at once. Yet the speaker argues that merely sending her out of the capital will not be enough, they must banish her from the entire empire. The Empress sighs, remarking that she is already burdened with countless responsibilities, yet everyone continues to ramble endlessly about Lilith. The Emperor interjects with irritation, questioning why people cannot simply avoid doing things that require apologies in the first place. At last, the Empress turns to those gathered and demands to know exactly what Lady Lilith has done, her voice carrying both exhaustion and authority as she questions them. The Empress steps out and addresses one of the caretakers, observing that it appears a problem has arisen with the World Tree because of Lady Lilith's blasphemous action. The caretaker confirms that this is indeed correct, explaining that Lilith dared to give the World Tree lake water and even pruned its branches. He continues listing the various things she did, actions that prompt the Empress to reflect that this situation is exactly why she had wanted to leave the keepers of the World Tree as they were. However, her little idiot brother continues to tease her, claiming that he knows someone who would be perfect for taking care of the World Tree. With clear mischief, he suggests the Empire's best doctor of horticulture, Lilith, as the ideal candidate. The Emperor shows visible frustration, remarking that his brother truly would not leave her alone about the matter. Meanwhile, one of the caretakers urgently calls the Empress's attention to the World Tree, urging her to look closely. He explains that the already holy World Tree has become even holier, to the point that it has begun glowing in just a single day. The Empress finds herself wondering whether her eyes are deceiving her, questioning if she is merely imagining things, yet the truth remains undeniable: the World Tree is indeed glowing at that very moment. She reflects on how, with the previous keepers, the tree had seemed far weaker, almost as if it had been dying back then. Seeking clarity, the Empress asks the caretaker about Lady Lilith's current whereabouts. The caretaker responds that he has heard Lilith is staying at the Imperial Guard barracks. Upon hearing this, the Empress immediately orders him to hurry and bring Lady Lilith before her without delay, emphasizing that the task must be carried out with the utmost respect. The scene cuts to Lilith and Adrian. He questions whether she truly means what she said just moments ago. She replies that of course she does, while wondering why he seems so upset, as she does not believe she said anything offensive. She explains that she does not want to sleep tonight, but soon realizes that she could have guessed his reaction or worded it better. However, she cannot exactly admit that she grabbed him because she wanted to do things that would make him hate her, so that they could push back the wedding for as long as possible. Adrian smiles gently and remarks that she must be very tired, suggesting that it would be best for her to go to bed right away. However, she asks him once again to wait. He wonders if she truly does not want to sleep tonight that badly. She immediately asks him to forget what she said, explaining that the matter is nothing big, but that she has a request she would like to make. She asks that he keep the fact that she is in the capital a secret, especially from her family. Adrian immediately agrees, which causes her to question why he is not going to ask her for the reason. He explains that his sister taught him that ladies tend to have many secrets, and that it feels strange to demand something in return for keeping her secret. Still, he steps forward and kisses her hand, politely asking if she could do him a favor as well. Lilith replies that as long as it is something she is capable of doing, she will agree. Adrian explains that it is actually something that only she can do. He tells her that the shadows have been rising in power again as of late. She begins to wonder about the shadows, recalling that according to the novel, the shadows lost their homeland to House Arca 1,000 years ago and therefore consider them their mortal enemies. She also remembers that they are known as a group of red-eyed people, and that many rumors describe the current leader of the shadows as cruel and violent. Adrian warns her that because of this danger, patrols have been tightened. He instructs her that if any suspicious person tries to speak with her, she should not respond to them and instead come find him immediately. Lilith quietly reflects that nothing good will come from getting too involved with him, even if she is only the Duke's fiancée on paper. Nevertheless, she responds by telling him that she understands. The scene then cuts to Adrian stepping outside, thinking to himself that he had literally just told Lilith about the shadows, and now the threat seems to have appeared already. Meanwhile, one of the knights glances here and there in confusion, thinking that it is strange because he heard that Adrian moved his room to the second floor, yet all the doors look the same, making it impossible to tell which one belongs to whom. He wonders where the commander could possibly be. At the same time, Adrian prepares himself, convinced that the suspicious figure must be one of the shadows, and he attempts to attack. However, before striking, he recognizes the person and realizes that it is Jeffrey. He immediately questions what Jeffrey is doing there. Jeffrey hurriedly explains that before anything else, Adrian should lower his sword now that his identity has been confirmed. Adrian then demands that Jeffrey explain why he is loitering in front of Lilith's room at such an hour. Jeffrey explains that he knows someone from the Magic Tower 4 Eyes and that the Empress is urgently searching for Lady Lilith. Adrian becomes worried and wonders if something has happened to Lilith. Even so, he scolds Jeffrey, questioning how he could even think of coming to Lilith's room at such an hour, and declares that the punishment will be 100 laps around the field. Jeffrey cries out in protest, insisting that he was only doing his job. The next day, the scene shifts to the Emperor speaking to Lilith. He explains that he had been looking for her the previous night, but his brother had vehemently refused to send for her, insisting that she was exhausted from her long journey. The Emperor adds that he also heard from the officials about what had happened, and he questions what exactly she did to the World Tree. Poor Lilith silently tells herself not to panic, even as her body trembles. She already knew that this moment would come, yet she cannot help but wonder whether she will truly be able to get out of this situation alive. The imperial court stands wrapped in a heavy stillness as Empress Aitana Arkshad presides over the matter that has stirred unrest throughout the palace since the previous day. She is a figure impossible to ignore. Her hair burns with a brilliance as vivid as living fire, cascading like molten embers over regal shoulders. Her eyes shine with a radiant gold, bright and commanding, carrying a brilliance that seems almost supernatural. Her beauty is of such rare perfection that any passerby would instinctively turn their head in awe, and in every aspect she embodies the title long whispered in stories the original novel's female lead, the woman destined to stand at the center of history itself. Yet beneath that breathtaking exterior lies an unmistakable austerity. She is known throughout the empire as a sovereign whose composure rivals steel, a woman whose authority is so absolute that not even the emperor himself can easily sway her will. The air around her feels cold with discipline, rigid with order, and utterly intolerant of foolishness or irreverence. Today, however, the tension in the chamber does not stem solely from imperial dignity. There has been widespread uproar regarding the events of yesterday, an incident so controversial that it borders on blasphemy. The emperor's inquiry lingers heavily in the air, pressing toward the accused with undeniable weight. The act committed has not merely been reckless, it has been interpreted as a violation of sacred boundaries, an offense against traditions older than memory. And still, amidst this gravity, the Empress's thoughts drift momentarily toward a far more peculiar irritation. Ever since morning, a strangely thin, persistent, and inexplicably mobile has followed her from chamber to chamber. It clings to her presence as though bound by invisible will, fluttering just within her peripheral vision. No matter how she moves, the leaf trails behind her like an unwanted shadow. The absurdity of such a thing unsettles her far more than she cares to admit, though she refuses to allow even a flicker of confusion to show on her composed face. Seeking clarity, she turns her attention toward Lilith, the woman at the center of the controversy. Lilith stands firm despite the oppressive atmosphere, neither shrinking nor faltering beneath imperial scrutiny. A subordinate Violet has already acknowledged that the actions carried out yesterday were indeed rude and disruptive by courtly standards. Yet the greater shock lies in the absence of remorse. Lilith does not retreat into apology nor soften her stance in fear. Instead, her reasoning rests upon the title granted to her by imperial decree. She has been appointed as an expert in horticulture, entrusted with the sacred responsibility of caring for the world tree, the ancient entity revered as the empire's spiritual cornerstone. As a horticulturist, her duty is not ornamental but vital. To ignore a dying tree, especially one so sacred, would be an insult not only to her profession but to her very sense of honor. Pride and discipline bind her actions more tightly than any law, and the sight of decay where life should flourish becomes something she cannot overlook. The Empress studies her without interruption, her golden gaze unwavering. To commit such an act within the sanctified grounds of the world tree is, by tradition, nothing less than blasphemy. Ritual and reverence have governed the tree's treatment for centuries, and to act outside those rites is to challenge the authority of the divine itself. Yet Lilith's conviction remains unshaken. She stands by the belief that, as an expert entrusted with knowledge, it was only right to act with everything she knew even if that knowledge clashed with tradition. Her acceptance of responsibility is clear. She is prepared to receive whatever punishment the Empire deems appropriate. There is no trembling plea, no desperate bargaining, only the quiet readiness of someone who understands consequences and chooses to face them. The Emperor's caution still hangs in the chamber, emphasizing that while knowledge holds value, there exists a line that must never be crossed. The sanctity of sacred traditions cannot be disregarded simply because one believes their method correct. The Empress, however, appears to weigh something deeper than law alone. Ordinarily, the prescribed punishment for such sacrilege would be immediate banishment from the palace, a disgrace that would stain one's name permanently. But Lilith's unwavering explanation and the sincerity within her reasoning stir an unusual response. Rather than condemning her outright, the Empress decides to grant her a rare opportunity, one not entirely free of consequence, yet far from the harsh fate she might have faced. A document is presented, formal, precise, and bound by imperial authority. Though it is not described as punishment in the strictest sense, it carries undeniable weight. Responsibility must still be acknowledged according to law, and redemption must be earned through effort rather than words. Lilith receives the contract with steady hands, fully aware that refusal is not an option. The gravity of the moment settles upon her shoulders as she scans its contents. What unfolds before her is not merely a disciplinary decree but a challenge of historic proportion. Since the era of the first emperor, from the very moment the empire was established, the world tree has stood as an eternal symbol of life and divine favor. Yet despite the passing of centuries, over 1,000 long years, it has never once bloomed. Its branches stretch skyward, ancient and majestic, but forever barren of blossoms. The contract makes the Empire's intention unmistakably clear. They are not casting her aside. They are entrusting her with a task that borders on the impossible. Lady Lilith is formally requested, indeed required, to use her knowledge, skill, and unwavering dedication to achieve what no one in recorded history has accomplished, to make the world tree produce flowers at last. Lilith studies the contract in her hands, her brows knitting together as disbelief presses heavily upon her thoughts. The request feels unreal, almost mocking in its scale. She lifts her gaze toward the Empress, silently questioning whether the sovereign truly intends for her to make the world tree produce flowers when it has not bloomed for more than 1,000 years. The sheer absurdity of the demand echoes loudly in her mind. A millennium of failure lies behind that tree, centuries of rituals, prayers, and experts who have all fallen short. And now the burden is placed squarely upon her shoulders. The Emperor's calm but probing tone lingers in the chamber, carrying the subtle challenge of authority. He wonders whether there is any problem with the task presented to her, though the words feel less like a question and more like a declaration that refusal is not an acceptable path. Within Lilith's mind, realization dawns with sharp clarity. The contract, in essence, allows her to commit any so-called blasphemy necessary, provided that the world tree ultimately flowers. Yet hidden beneath that apparent freedom lies a far darker clause. If she refuses the request, fails to carry it out, or discloses the contents of the agreement to anyone, the consequences will not fall upon her alone but extend to her entire family. The Emperor's explanation reinforces the severity of the matter. Blasphemy, according to imperial law, stands among the gravest of crimes imaginable. The very fact that negotiations have taken place with the keepers of the World Tree to establish these terms reveals how extraordinary the situation truly is. It has taken considerable effort just to secure this compromise, one that skirts the usual sentence of immediate punishment. To Lilith's growing dismay, the reality of the arrangement feels less like mercy and more like a suspended execution, a period granted not to forgive her, but to determine whether she and her family will ultimately live or perish. It is a deadline disguised as opportunity. Still, the Empress's composed demeanor suggests confidence rather than doubt. She appears convinced that Lilith possesses the ability to accomplish what generations have failed to achieve. Nearby, her disbelief becomes evident, her thoughts echoing the same question that rattles inside Lilith's mind, whether such a demand could possibly be serious. Yet there is no turning back now. The moment unfolds with crushing inevitability as Lilith leaves the palace grounds, the weight of the signed contract settling upon her like chains. Her signature marks the beginning of an ordeal she neither sought nor imagined. Within the palace, the Empress stands by a tall window, gazing outward into the distance. Her thoughts drift toward the earlier report delivered by Adrian. She reflects upon how biased the account had been, so skewed in its presentation that she did not even bother pretending to listen attentively. Still, the memory of Lilith lingers in her mind with surprising clarity. There is something about that woman, something raw, capable, and stubborn that draws the Empress's attention. The Emperor approaches quietly, his curiosity evident as he asks whether something amusing has caught her interest. The Empress responds with measured confidence, remarking that she believes they have discovered a talent worth observing, someone whose abilities may soon prove invaluable. The Emperor, intrigued, presses further, asking at least which family this promising individual belongs to. Yet the Empress refuses to disclose such details, insisting that she must continue observing Lilith personally for some time before revealing anything more. The scene shifts to Lilith, now walking alone beyond the palace grounds, her emotions boiling beneath the surface. Fury churns within her chest as the strange leaf-like ball continues to follow her, bobbing along with irritating persistence. The tiny thing emits repetitive, childish sounds, an incessant pee-pee that grates upon her already frayed nerves. Her thoughts spiral into disbelief as a horrifying suspicion forms. Could this ridiculous leaf ball actually be the World Tree itself? The notion feels absurd, yet the possibility refuses to fade. She wonders whether it is somehow her fault, whether the creature emerged because she had mercilessly chopped off its branches during her desperate attempt to save it. Frustration erupts within her, spilling into the open as she vents her anger toward fate itself. She cannot understand how not a single thing in her life ever seems to proceed smoothly. Exhaustion and resentment mix together until she feels utterly sick of everything surrounding her. Meanwhile, the World Tree reacts with equal irritation, though its response remains unheard by others. The small creature grumbles internally, complaining about how loud she is being. It questions whether she truly cannot hear its voice, concluding that she must simply be staring without comprehension. With growing impatience, it demands water, expecting immediate obedience. Lilith, on the other hand, directs her frustration squarely at the creature, blaming it entirely for the disaster that has overtaken her life. Nevertheless, she retrieves water and offers it, begrudgingly fulfilling the responsibility forced upon her. Moments pass, and as silence stretches between them, she wonders whether this monotonous task will continue endlessly, whether she must keep watering it again and again until flowers finally bloom. A sobering thought follows close behind. Perhaps she should consider herself fortunate that she was not executed immediately. Compared to death, even this maddening responsibility appears merciful. Unable to suppress her curiosity any longer, she calls out to the World Tree, questioning why it has fallen silent now that she has begun addressing it directly. In response, the creature reacts with sudden realization, astonished that she is actually speaking to it. Her confusion deepens as she glances around, wondering whether anyone else can perceive the strange entity before her. The World Tree expresses satisfaction that she has finally acknowledged its presence. Observing its animated reaction, Lilith briefly regrets abandoning her earlier strategy of ignoring it entirely. Still, she presses forward, questioning whether it truly is the legendary World Tree itself. The creature responds with mild annoyance, asking whether she speaks to ordinary trees in the same manner. She counters with practical logic: ordinary trees cannot converse with people. The World Tree boasts that it could accomplish many feats if only it possessed sufficient mana. Lilith's mind immediately connects this statement to her current task. If mana is what it requires, then perhaps water functions as a substitute, or at least as a temporary solution. Driven by cautious hope, she wonders aloud whether the tree could grow flowers if supplied with enough mana. The question causes the creature to hesitate, curiosity flickering across its small form. It asks why such knowledge matters to her, yet the determination shining in her eyes compels it to offer a vague possibility. Perhaps, under the right conditions, blooming might occur. Her reaction, however, carries a trace of skepticism, and her uncertain response irritates the creature. Offended by what it interprets as rudeness, it demands more water with stubborn authority. Far away, within the imposing walls of the imperial palace, tension brews among the knights. Concerned voices murmur about losing sight of the shadowed figures they have been tracking. Adrian stands at the center of the group, his anger barely contained. His frustration bursts forth as he reprimands the knights, questioning how they dare hold their heads high after failing their duty. The knights bow in apology, weighed down by guilt as their failure echoes loudly in the chamber. While others worry about consequences, Adrian's thoughts drift toward a different concern entirely: Lady Lilith. He believes with certainty that she remains somewhere within the capital, and the realization fuels his determination. Memories from childhood resurface vividly in his mind. He recalls a moment when she reached out and grasped his hand, studying his rough palms with gentle sincerity. Her words from that day linger in his memory, acknowledging how hard he had worked despite the burdens placed upon him. She had been the only person who did not focus on his title or outward appearance, the only one who saw him as an individual rather than a symbol of status. Back then, her kindness had saved him from isolation. Those simple words had given him strength when he felt unseen and misunderstood. Now, as he stands in the present, a quiet resolve hardens within him. The time has come for him to return that protection. He intends to ensure that she feels safest by his side, shielded from danger and uncertainty. Yet frustration gnaws at him relentlessly. If he cannot even capture a handful of rebel forces, how can he hope to protect the person he values most? Just as his thoughts spiral deeper into self-criticism, a familiar voice calls out to him, cutting sharply through the tension. He turns toward the source, startled to see Lilith standing there. Her presence interrupts the storm of his thoughts, and with steady determination, she approaches him, requesting a moment of his time. Seeing Lilith, he becomes extremely excited and immediately asks what has happened to her. Before she can even say anything, he quickly places the cloak around her shoulders without hesitation. He cannot help but question how she became so wet. To understand that, the scene shifts back to what happened earlier. The water tree suddenly splashes water all over her while continuing to cry out for more water. She explains that she has been giving him water this entire time, yet he shouts that what she provided was barely even a sip and insists that he is extremely thirsty. Eventually, she concedes and tells him that she will fetch more water, urging him to quiet down. Despite her frustration, she asks out of genuine curiosity why he is so obsessed with water, especially since he previously claimed that as long as he has mana, he would be fine. After all, he is the World Tree, and she believed that meant he would not need ordinary water. The World Tree reluctantly explains that he did not want to say this, but he believes she is being foolish. His remark makes her flare up in protest as she declares that she is, in fact, a doctor. The World Tree urges her to listen carefully. He explains that he is the power of a god that has taken the form of a dream. In other words, regardless of what his soul may be made of, his body remains that of a tree. He questions whether she understands this now. She responds with brief acknowledgement, which frustrates him even further, as he truly expected more understanding from someone claiming to be a doctor. She, in turn, questions what her profession has to do with this situation, while the World Tree grumbles that this is exactly the problem with academic types. Choosing to be honest, he begins to recount his sorrowful story. He explains that he had been in a deep slumber, awaiting death, until she awakened him. Because of that, he insists that she now bears responsibility for taking care of him. This declaration makes her shout again in disbelief, internally lamenting that she never imagined the legendary World Tree would be on the brink of death. She also worries that she herself might collapse from exhaustion before she could ever satisfy the endless thirst of such a plant. Back in the present moment, Adrian notices her reaction and calls out to her, wondering what has happened. She quickly explains that she had been fetching water for the World Tree when she accidentally tripped. He asks whether she is hurt and, with a gentle smile, wonders if carrying the water buckets has become difficult for her. He suggests that perhaps he could begin carrying them for her instead. She replies that she had actually been planning to ask Jeffrey for help with the task. He pauses, wondering whether she is referring to his right-hand man. She confirms this and asks if he could call or send for Jeffrey on her behalf. This request immediately dampens his mood. The scene then shifts to the two of them seated together on a sofa. He suggests that she should warm herself up first. She thanks him politely and takes a sip of the tea provided. As she drinks, she notices that Adrian appears somewhat downcast for reasons she cannot immediately understand. Assuming she might be interrupting his training session, she politely suggests that if he is busy, perhaps she should come back later. He explains that he is merely a little surprised, nothing more, particularly by the fact that she would ask Jeffrey for help. He admits that he had not realized the two of them were so close. She responds by clarifying the situation. She explains that she had only just met Sir Geoffrey on her very first day in the capital. During that meeting, Geoffrey introduced himself as Adrian's right-hand man and told her that if she ever needed assistance with heavy lifting, she should call him at any time. It just so happened that she now needed someone for precisely that purpose. Adrian glances at Adrian and casually remarks that Geoffrey appears to be stronger than him. In response, she simply comments that it is good for him. Adrian continues staring at her for a long moment. His silence makes her wonder internally whether he had been expecting a more thoughtful or impressive answer. Realizing she should probably clarify further, she begins explaining the real reason behind her request. She states that she needs someone to gather rainwater for her. At the same time, she mentally complains about the overly picky nature of her tree, which insists specifically on drinking rainwater and is causing her endless trouble. She continues explaining her reasoning in a more professional tone. Rainwater, she notes, contains nitrogen, oxygen, and various minerals that are beneficial for plant growth, while also having no salinity. In addition, it possesses an appropriate pH level and ionic concentration, which would be highly beneficial for the nutrition of the world tree. After finishing her explanation, she adds that she did not want to trouble him with such a trivial task. Hearing this, Adrian suddenly blushes deeply. Observing his reaction, she calls out to him, slightly puzzled. He admits that he now believes he had misunderstood the situation earlier. He then firmly adds that next time, she should come directly to him instead of seeking Geoffrey's help. To him, nothing related to her could ever be considered trivial. His response makes Lilith feel momentarily flustered. However, she quickly reminds herself that this situation is not entirely new. Adrian, after all, lives up to his reputation. There is a reason the author described him as the idol of the Fire Society. She tells herself that she must remain composed and not lose control of her thoughts, especially since he is, in another timeline, the very cause of her death. Meanwhile, elsewhere nearby, several knights discreetly peek toward the two of them. They whisper among themselves in disbelief, wondering if they truly just witnessed their commander's smile. They reflect that they have served in the Imperial Guard for 5 years, yet this is the very first time they have ever seen him display such an expression. One knight whispers again that the commander has smiled once more, and the group becomes visibly uneasy at the sight. Another knight calls out to Geoffrey, questioning whether it is truly acceptable to see the commander smiling like this. Geoffrey responds by telling them to listen carefully, asking whether they know the commander's nickname. One of the rookies guesses that it might be something along the lines of a demon from the lowest circle of hell. Geoffrey quickly denies this and explains that the real nickname is something far worse, so much so that it would need to be censored due to age restriction. At the very same time, that fearsome commander is calmly asking Lilith whether there is anything else, aside from gathering rainwater, that he could help her with. She then mentions that she is planning to go into the city the following day. Without hesitation, he immediately states that he will carry her bags for her. Watching this unfold, the knights stare in stunned disbelief. To them, it looks as though their terrifying commander has transformed into an obedient and adorable puppy in front of Lady Lilith. Some of them begin to feel that they are witnessing the beginning of a very interesting story. However, after Lilith finally departs, poor Geoffrey once again finds himself subjected to punishment, suffering the consequences of the commander's unpredictable mood. It is the next day, and the morning begins with a quiet sense of preparation as Gina assists Lilith in getting ready for her outing. Gina carefully helps her with the final touches of her appearance, moving with practiced familiarity. While working, Gina wonders whether Lilith is going into the city accompanied by the Duke. She recalls that Lilith had previously mentioned a different plan, one that involved asking Geoffrey or someone similar to accompany her instead. Lilith acknowledges that Gina's memory is correct and that asking Geoffrey had indeed been her original plan. However, circumstances had shifted unexpectedly, and events had unfolded in a way that forced her to change her arrangements. Gina reacts with mild disappointment, expressing sympathy for the sudden change in plans. She reasons that if the Duke himself is accompanying Lilith, then her own presence will not be necessary, since such protection would already be more than sufficient. At that moment, Gina notices something unusual resting nearby. Her attention shifts to a strange object, a small leaf-shaped ball that she picks up with visible curiosity. She studies it closely, turning it in her hands while silently questioning what such a peculiar item could possibly be. Lilith explains that the object had fallen directly from the world tree, and she speculates that it might be some sort of fairy or spirit. The suggestion strikes Gina as oddly unscientific, especially coming from Lilith, who is usually known for her practical and logical thinking. Despite the inconsistency, Lilith maintains her speculation and entrusts the object to Gina's care. She asks Gina to keep watch over it while she is away, treating the mysterious leaf ball with cautious importance. Gina accepts the responsibility and offers a silent wish for Lilith's safe journey. As Lilith begins walking toward her destination, her steps are steady but unhurried. However, her movement is abruptly interrupted when she accidentally collides with someone standing in her path. The unexpected impact causes a brief moment of surprise. The person she bumps into turns out to be none other than Adrian. He immediately expresses concern for her condition, noticing the slight redness on her nose and worrying that she might have hurt herself. Lilith quickly reassures him that she is perfectly fine and that the collision caused no real harm. Adrian remains visibly relieved, his demeanor bright and attentive as he expresses gratitude that she is unharmed. Without further delay, the two of them proceed together toward the waiting carriage. Soon after, they are seated inside, and the carriage begins its steady journey toward the city. The rhythmic movement of the wheels accompanies their arrival into the urban district. When they finally reach the city area, Lilith gazes out through the carriage window, taking in the view with quiet astonishment. She finds herself wondering whether this truly is the same city she once knew. For the past several years, she had been stationed in the southern regions, isolated from the capital while dedicating herself to her work. Because of that separation, she had not witnessed the rapid transformation that had taken place. The capital now appears remarkably developed, filled with signs of progress and recovery. She reflects on how difficult it is to believe that a war had once taken place here not long ago. The visible peace and prosperity suggest that the central figures of the realm must have worked tirelessly to restore stability and rebuild what had been lost. Originally, Lilith had intended to finish her business quickly and return without delay, especially because of the looming concerns surrounding the shadows. However, the peaceful atmosphere of the city begins to influence her thoughts. Seeing the calm streets and vibrant surroundings, she briefly considers the possibility of staying longer to observe more of the capital's transformation. At that moment, Adrian draws her attention, noticing her interest in the cityscape. He suggests the idea of making regular nighttime visits to the city, offering to escort her personally each week so she could enjoy the sights. The proposal is delivered with enthusiasm, yet Lilith immediately rejects the notion in her mind. She recognizes that such leisurely outings are unrealistic given her responsibilities. Her duties toward the World Tree demand constant vigilance, leaving little room for casual indulgence. She reminds herself internally that no matter how peaceful the city appears, her primary responsibility remains unchanged. The presence of Adrian beside her still feels like a dangerous complication, one she mentally labels as a potential death trap that she must avoid becoming entangled with. Determined to maintain distance, she reinforces her plan to return directly to the barracks once her business in the city is complete. The intention is clear and unwavering. They will head back immediately without unnecessary delays. By doing so, she believes she can minimize risk and ensure that nothing unexpected or disastrous has the chance to occur. They enter one of the shops, stepping inside as the faint scent of wood, soil, and metal tools fills the air. The shopkeeper immediately notices their presence, and his expression brightens with visible excitement. He remarks that this is quite an occasion, proudly stating that although his shop carries many high-quality products, this is the very first time a noble lady has personally come to purchase items herself rather than sending attendants to handle the task. Lilith does not waste time entertaining his enthusiasm. She moves directly to business, asking whether he has the items listed on the paper she presents. The shopkeeper takes the list from her hands and scans it carefully. As his eyes move across the contents, he notes that most of the items are specialty tools. He begins speculating aloud, wondering whether she intends to engage in horticulture. Without waiting for confirmation, he continues rambling, confidently declaring that the items on her list alone will not be sufficient. He explains that, given the current season, she must also purchase nutritional supplements and fertilizers if she intends to grow plants properly. His tone grows increasingly self-assured as he lectures her, as though he believes himself to be providing essential knowledge. Listening to his endless talking, Lilith feels irritation slowly building within her. The sheer volume of his rambling makes her think with dry frustration that she might as well collapse on the spot rather than endure his chatter any longer. She recognizes the familiar behavior of someone eager to appear knowledgeable at all costs, a trait she privately associates with pretentious individuals who wish to seem like experts in every subject. Still, the shopkeeper continues without pause. He reassures her that she should not feel embarrassed about lacking knowledge and insists that he will prepare an additional list to assist with what he assumes to be her flower arrangement hobby. Lilith reflects inwardly that she had always believed such overbearing personalities existed mostly within academic circles, yet here she stands facing one in reality. Maintaining her composure, she attempts to correct him. She explains firmly that she is not trying to grow flowers at all and instructs him to simply provide the items she requested. However, the shopkeeper remains unconvinced. He continues speaking, expressing disbelief that a noble lady like herself would not be interested in cultivating flowers to create charming bouquets. Her patience begins to wear thin. She grips her thread tightly, trying once more to clarify that the items are meant for trees rather than decorative plants. Before she can fully explain, Adrian, who has been watching silently until now, suddenly reaches his limit. With a sharp movement, Adrian slams his hand forcefully onto the desk. The loud crack echoes through the shop, instantly silencing the room. His gaze hardens, and his presence turns cold and intimidating. He questions how much longer the shopkeeper intends to keep talking without pause and wonders aloud whether the man is always this chatty. He remarks that failing to recognize when to remain silent is a habit that can dangerously shorten a person's lifespan. The shopkeeper freezes, his confidence instantly shattered. A chill runs through him as fear overtakes his earlier enthusiasm. He stammers out apologies, begging forgiveness while visibly trembling. The threat in Adrian's demeanor is unmistakable, and the shopkeeper clearly understands the danger he now faces. Observing the situation, Lilith feels concern rise within her. She realizes that Adrian's anger could escalate into genuine harm if left unchecked. The thought crosses her mind that he might actually kill the shopkeeper at this rate if she does not intervene. Acting quickly, she steps forward and addresses Adrian, urging him to stop. She explains that it is not unusual for nobles to receive this type of treatment when attempting to engage in horticulture themselves. She reassures him that she has grown accustomed to such misunderstandings and insists that the situation is not worth escalating. Her tone remains calm but firm, attempting to ease the tension before it spirals further. Adrian remains visibly annoyed, his irritation lingering beneath the surface. Lilith continues speaking, emphasizing that causing a scene will not benefit them in any way. Gradually, her reasoning begins to cool the situation. Meanwhile, the shopkeeper, eager to avoid further conflict, hurriedly gathers the requested items and announces that he will ring them up immediately. After completing the purchase, the two of them leave the shop and step back into the street. As they walk away, Lilith begins to suspect that she may have spoken too soon about the situation being resolved. Since leaving the shop, Adrian has become noticeably quiet. His mood appears subdued, and an unspoken tension lingers around him. Because her legs are shorter than his, she struggles to keep up with his longer stride. After a moment, she calls out and asks him to wait for her. Hearing her voice, Adrian slows and glances back at her. He questions why she has returned to addressing him formally as Duke and wonders why she cannot continue calling him as she did inside the shop. His body language grows restless, and he begins twitching slightly with agitation. He remarks that her behavior is driving him to distraction. Lilith, misinterpreting his reaction, begins to worry that he might be upset because she used a nickname without permission. Wanting to correct her mistake, she apologizes sincerely, explaining that she should not have called him AD without first asking. She continues clarifying her reasoning. She explains that inside the shop, they were surrounded by strangers and had no guards present, which meant she could not openly use his full title or reveal his identity. She emphasizes that her actions were intended to protect him and maintain discretion. As Adrian listens, his heart begins to beat faster. The realization that she had been looking out for him catches him off guard, stirring unexpected warmth within him. He finds himself wondering whether she truly had been thinking of his safety in that moment. Lilith adds that if the nickname made him uncomfortable, she will avoid using it again in the future. However, Adrian responds in an unexpected way. He addresses her with a softened voice, calling her Lily in return. He leans slightly closer to her, closing the distance between them, and questions whether she is deliberately testing his patience. He remarks that she should know he is not the type to miss an opportunity once it presents itself. His heart continues pounding as emotions build within him. The moment grows tense and intimate as he leans nearer, clearly preparing to confess something deeply important, something he considers precious. Just as the words are about to leave his mouth, the atmosphere is abruptly disrupted. A sudden movement draws their attention, breaking the fragile tension between them. A figure appears nearby, startling enough at first glance to resemble a monster. However, upon closer inspection, it becomes clear that the figure is not a monster at all. Instead, it is a man deliberately disguised to resemble one. The disguised figure stands before them and questions what the two of them are doing in that location, interrupting the moment that had been building between them. The scene cuts to a lively restaurant, filled with the rich aroma of freshly prepared dishes and the hum of patrons enjoying their meals. As Lilith steps inside, her thoughts wander with quiet disbelief. She reflects on how unexpected this moment is. Who could have imagined that she would run into her brother in a place like this? The thought lingers in her mind as her gaze settles on him. Her brother, whose name is Beer, is Lilith's one and only older brother, a presence from her past that carries both familiarity and distance. Beer wastes no time asserting himself in the bustling environment. With the same bold energy that has always defined him, he immediately gestures to the waiter and orders everything available from top to bottom on the menu. His appetite seems immense, almost exaggerated, yet it carries a hint of sincerity. He explains that he has been busy training with Jason and had not managed to eat for several days. His tone suggests that such a situation is not unusual for him, as though hardship and endurance are simply part of his daily routine. After placing his order, Beer shifts his attention toward Duke Aiden. The familiarity between them is evident in the way Beer acknowledges him, noting that it has been a long time since they last met. Aiden responds with calm courtesy, expressing that there is no need for excessive formality and encouraging Beer to treat him as he did in the past. However, Beer cannot bring himself to follow that suggestion. He insists that such casual treatment is no longer appropriate, as Aiden now holds the title of Duke. The respect in Beer's demeanor appears genuine, rooted in recognition of status and the changes time has brought. Once that exchange settles, Beer turns his attention back to Lilith. He remarks that it has indeed been a long time since he last saw her, his tone carrying a faint trace of nostalgia. Lilith acknowledges the passage of time and wonders inwardly how he has been all these years. Beer replies with a confidence that reflects his current state, implying that his condition speaks for itself. At that very moment, an unexpected interruption occurs. Jason, the pet belonging to Beer, suddenly leaps through the window, creating a brief disturbance that draws attention from those nearby. Beer reacts with enthusiasm rather than concern, proudly stating that he has been doing exceptionally well alongside his adorable companion Jason. He recounts how nature once called him into the wilderness, where he fought a bear and eventually formed a friendship with it. The tale is delivered with such casual pride that it seems almost unbelievable, yet entirely fitting for someone of his personality. As Lilith observes him, a quiet realization settles in her thoughts. Her brother has not changed one bit. The same confidence, the same larger-than-life storytelling, and the same unrestrained spirit remain intact despite the years that have passed. Beer then comments on Lilith's appearance, noting that she looks better than she did a few years ago. His observation leads him to reflect that this must be the first time they have seen each other since she left home to pursue her studies. The memory stirs deeper reflections within Lilith. When it comes to Beer, she remembers how their connection slowly faded after she left home at the age of 12. Communication ceased over time, not out of resentment but simply because life carried them in different directions. As a result, she holds no hard feelings toward him, though the absence of contact remains a quiet reality between them. Yet beneath these present interactions, echoes of the past linger in Lilith's mind. Old words resurface, phrases once spoken by the maids in hushed tones, words that carried blame she never truly understood. She remembers how they used to whisper that if only the young lady had not been born, her Grace would still be alive. Such cruel remarks were repeated often enough to carve themselves into her memory. They would lament bitterly, questioning why Lady Lilith's birthday and the Duchess's death date had to fall on the very same day. These memories drift through her thoughts even as the lively atmosphere of the restaurant continues around her, blending past sorrow with the strange warmth of reunion in the present moment. Not to mention, the Duke has not been leaving the house at all since her Grace's passing. That memory lingers in the background of Lilith's thoughts, like a shadow that never quite fades. Even so, she steadies herself and tells Beer that she is doing pretty well these days. Her tone remains calm, almost casual, as though she wishes to reassure him that her life has not been consumed by hardship. Beer studies her carefully, his gaze lingering as if trying to measure the truth behind her words. After a brief pause, he remarks that as long as she is happy, that is what matters. However, he admits that he did not even know she had returned to the capital. There is a hint of disappointment in his reaction, as he points out that if she had sent him a letter in advance, he would have come personally to pick her up. Lilith expresses her thanks, acknowledging the gesture, but explains that she only returned recently anyway, leaving little time to notify anyone. Beer then questions how long she intends to remain here. He remarks that he did not hear anything from their father regarding her arrival, which makes him wonder whether she has somewhere to stay. Lilith replies that she does indeed have a place to stay, explaining that she is currently staying with Adrian at the Imperial Guard barracks. At that moment, Adrian clears his throat, subtly attempting to signal something to her. His intention is clear, he wants her to call him by his nickname rather than his formal title. However, Lilith turns toward him with mild confusion, questioning what he just said. Adrian continues to nudge her insistently, even going so far as to pinch her, attempting to make his point clearer without openly stating it. Lilith, however, refuses to catch on to his hint and once again addresses him formally as Duke Adrian. In response, Adrian pinches her even more persistently, which causes her to grow increasingly puzzled. She wonders what on earth he is trying to tell her and why he seems so desperate to correct her. He silently urges her to be mindful of what she calls him, especially since they are out in public where others might overhear. Eventually, Lilith turns her face slightly and relents, calling him by his nickname instead. She then clarifies to Beer that she and Adrian are staying at the palace. Hearing this, Beer expresses visible relief. He remarks that he feels reassured knowing she is staying with the Duke of all people. However, there is still something weighing on his mind, something he has been meaning to ask. He brings up the matter of her engagement, questioning whether she had not called it off. He wonders aloud whether it is truly acceptable for her to remain so close to Adrian if the engagement had already been annulled. Lilith responds by explaining that there had been a complication involving the submission of certain documents. Because of that issue, the engagement was never officially called off. Beer reacts with clear surprise, stating that this is the first he has heard of such a development. He notes that he never received any word about it from their father, which only deepens his confusion. Suddenly, the atmosphere shifts as Jason begins to growl. The low sound immediately catches Beer's attention, prompting him to dash away without hesitation. He apologizes hastily, explaining that he will ask their father about the matter later. With that, he leaves abruptly, his sudden departure leaving Adrian and Lilith standing where they are rather than sitting as one might expect in a restaurant. Lilith exhales softly and turns toward the others present, offering an apology on behalf of her brother. She explains that sometimes he can be a bit too much to handle. Afterward, she questions whether they should leave as well, sensing that the moment has grown awkward. Adrian then asks her a question that seems to carry more weight than the previous conversation. He asks whether she truly had not heard anything about it. Lilith wonders what he means, her curiosity rising. Adrian then reveals the truth that her father knew everything. He knew that their engagement had never been called off, and he had known this for quite a long time. The weight of that statement hangs heavily in the air, leaving Lilith momentarily stunned. The scene then shifts back to the Imperial Guard barracks. Lilith is seen tapping her fingers lightly, her mind racing with thoughts. As she reflects on the situation, she realizes that perhaps this revelation is not as surprising as it first seemed. When she considers the nature of her father, the realization feels almost inevitable. Lilith's biological father, Vincent, held immense authority. He was the head of Soleria's judicial branch as well as the leader of an intelligence agency known as the Emperor's EARD. In the original course of events, Vincent used his position to shield the tyrant's actions from scrutiny while simultaneously extending support to Adrian, who had been part of the resistance at the time. He had done so because he foresaw Adrian's potential, recognizing that Adrian would one day rise to possess extraordinary power and authority. Considering all of this, Lilith concludes that there is no possible way her father would have been unaware of the missing documents related to the annulment request. She becomes convinced that once again, her father simply chose what he believed was best for the family. In his eyes, forming ties with House Arkshad would bring undeniable benefit. To him, offering her hand in marriage to secure that alliance would be a practical and advantageous decision. In that case, apart from avoiding the fate of her original demise, she now realizes that she must also interfere with her father's plans by actually breaking off her engagement to Adrian this time. However, another concern presses heavily on her thoughts. She wonders how she is supposed to make the world tree flower when even mana has proven ineffective. The problem feels overwhelming, threatening to drag her into negative thinking. She forces herself to stop dwelling on those dark possibilities. For now, she decides that she will get dressed and focus on practical matters, beginning with considering what to do once the tools she purchased earlier arrive. Just as her thoughts settle into a tentative plan, a sudden knock sounds at the door. The unexpected noise pulls her attention immediately. She wonders whether the items she ordered have already arrived so quickly. With that thought in mind, she moves to open the door. However, when she looks outside, she discovers that it is not the delivery she expected. Instead, standing before her is Adrian, holding a bouquet of flowers in his hand. Lilith questions what brings Adrian to her at such an hour, and the sudden tension in the air is almost tangible. Adrian's heart pounds heavily beneath his composure as he stands before her, visibly unsettled by her suspicion. When she asks whether he has been keeping an eye on her, he immediately denies it, insisting with urgency that nothing of the sort is true. Lilith, however, remarks that she keeps unexpectedly running into him, which only deepens her uncertainty. Adrian quickly apologizes, worried that he may have given her the wrong impression. In an attempt to ease the situation, he gently presents her with a bouquet of flowers. Lilith accepts them hesitantly, her expression filled with confusion as she questions their purpose. Adrian explains that he had noticed her looking somewhat down earlier at the cafe, and although it may not be anything significant, he had been concerned about her mood. He admits that he simply hoped the gesture might lift her spirits even a little. Lilith is taken aback, realizing that she had believed she had concealed her emotions well, yet Adrian had still noticed her disappointment. The two of them fall into a brief silence, their eyes meeting as an unspoken understanding passes between them. Adrian then shifts the conversation, revealing that he is also there to deliver a message. His sister has extended an invitation to Lilith for the upcoming Firen event. The mention of Firen causes something to stir within Lilith. She silently reflects that the moment she had anticipated has finally arrived. In the second part of the Promise of the World Tree, Firen is known as a significant spring celebration, one of the grandest imperial gatherings after the Harvest Festival. This year, the event is to be hosted by Aitana, the Empress herself. Aitana is remembered as a flawless ruler in the original narrative, a figure whose authority once stood unchallenged. Yet Lilith recalls that during the first Firen she hosted, an unforeseen incident occurred that gradually began to tarnish her reputation. Adrian continues, mentioning that he has heard Lilith does not enjoy crowded gatherings. He carefully suggests that she need not attend if she is uncomfortable. However, before he can finish his thought, Lilith firmly interrupts, stating that since the Empress herself has extended the invitation, it would be inappropriate not to attend with grace. More than that, she admits that having recently returned to the capital, she is still unfamiliar with many of the noble gentlemen present, which makes attendance all the more necessary. Then, with a composed yet unexpected request, she asks Adrian whether he would be willing to serve as her escort for the occasion. The request catches him off guard, and a faint blush rises to his face as he immediately agrees, confessing that he had intended to ask her the same thing himself. Relieved and slightly flustered, he advises her to rest well for now. She remains behind with a quiet determination, already preparing to carry out her own plans without needing further instruction or formal direction. Lilith's lips curl into a faint, knowing grin as Adrian's agreement settles between them. If he stands beside her at the Firen, handling what comes next will become significantly easier. The thought lingers in her mind like a quiet calculation rather than a fleeting emotion, as though every piece on the board is slowly falling into place. Far away from the warmth of that moment, the night deepens over a jagged cliff where darkness clings to the edges of stone. A solitary figure stands at the summit, cloaked and motionless against the wind. The silence is broken when another man arrives, his presence cautious yet familiar. The hooded figure greets him first, voice low but deliberate, and refers to him as Chief without hesitation. The chief demands an update on the progress of the plan, his tone sharp with expectation. The hooded man responds without delay, reporting that everything is proceeding exactly as intended. He speaks of names carved into history like wounds that never heal. Conrad, once known as Raitan the Shadow, the one who 1,000 years ago forced their ancestors into a life of persecution. He also mentions Arx HD, the traitor of the Holy Alliance, whose betrayal still echoes through their bloodline. The chief listens in silence before declaring that the timing could not be more perfect. The moment has finally arrived to make their move. Something long buried is now being prepared to resurface, and the air around them feels heavier with the weight of that decision. Meanwhile, as the day before the Firen party arrives, Lilith is already drowning in relentless work. It has been a full week since she assumed the role of World Trees Keeper, and yet the workload refuses to diminish. Responsibilities pile up endlessly, leaving no room for rest. She moves mechanically, throwing water toward the World Tree as though even fatigue has become part of her routine. Exhaustion clings to her like a second skin, and she feels as though she is barely holding herself together. All she can think about is the need to finish the annulment process quickly so she can finally return to the south. But even that thought feels distant beneath the pressure of her current duties. The World Tree suddenly breaks the monotony, questioning why she is already slacking off. Lilith immediately protests, insisting that she is not slacking but merely stepping away early for the day. The explanation follows quickly. She has received a direct request from the Empress to examine the flowers meant for the Firen ballroom decoration. The World Tree finds it strange, pointing out that as a horticulture specialist, she is now being treated like a florist. Lilith acknowledges the logic but counters it with her own reasoning. An invitation tied to the Empress and an imperial event of such magnitude cannot be dismissed lightly. It is, in her view, the highest form of recognition a professional in her position could receive. Still, she quietly suspects that the Empress may also be testing her reputation and reliability. Standing up, she informs him matter-of-factly that she is only notifying him of her temporary departure. The World Tree reacts instantly, asking how long she intends to leave him alone again. Lilith replies that she will return tomorrow, assuring him that there is still far too much work waiting upon her return. He bluntly calls her a liar, prompting her to question where such a claim is coming from. Has she ever truly deceived him before? Before the exchange can escalate further, a small, strange interruption appears. A leaf-like ball suddenly pops into view, drawing Lilith's attention. For a brief moment, she is thrown into confusion, her thoughts shifting toward whether this unusual being is connected to the World Tree. The sight makes her pause, reassessing everything she thought she understood. The World Tree quickly insists that if she has time to accuse him, she should instead focus on the tiny being in front of her. Lilith, still puzzled, questions whether it is acceptable to leave childcare responsibilities to her. She half-jokingly wonders if she has suddenly become a caretaker of some sort. The World Tree immediately objects, asking who exactly she thinks the parent is. Lilith points out that the leaf ball clearly resembles him, its form echoing his essence. That observation only irritates him further, and he snaps back that he is not a normal tree and cannot reproduce in such a way. Even if someone were to plant his seeds, nothing would grow. He is singular, there is no other of his kind in the world. That revelation causes Lilith to pause, her thoughts shifting. If the World Tree is truly unique, then the existence of the leaf ball becomes even more unusual. With Gina absent, there is no one else to look after the small creature. As she weighs the situation, she glances back at the World Tree, who now seems to be reconsidering his own words. His earlier confidence falters slightly as he realizes she is genuinely expecting him to take responsibility for the strange little being. The Empress is seen raising her voice as she demands order within the hall, insisting that a wide path be cleared immediately for movement and decorum. The surrounding people respond with fear and urgency, pleading for forgiveness as they scramble to comply with her command. Jeffrey observes the entire scene carefully, noting that the Empress has been unusually sharp and severe throughout the day. A concern lingers in his mind that her rising anger might, at some point, be directed toward Lady Lilith as well. Meanwhile, Lilith is running as quickly as possible, clearly in a rush and anxious about being late. She internally blames her delay on what she considers an unnecessarily demanding assignment given by the so-called World Dream task, which had kept her occupied until the very last moment before departure. She even had to exchange her time in a babysitting duty involving a troublesome assignment, which further delayed her arrival. Despite all of this, she finally reaches the venue and makes her entrance. Upon arriving, Lilith formally introduces herself with respectful courtesy toward Her Majesty the Empress, maintaining a humble demeanor as she acknowledges the imperial presence. Jeffrey, who is observing nearby, immediately senses that the situation could become problematic, though he is surprised when the Empress's expression unexpectedly brightens. The Empress welcomes her warmly and acknowledges her arrival without hesitation, almost as though she had been expecting her all along. Jeffrey silently begins to suspect that the relationship between the two may be closer than he previously understood, possibly even resembling that of siblings in familiarity. Lilith looks around the grand hall and notices the presence of rare and exotic flowers arranged throughout the venue. She remarks on their rarity, recognizing that such specimens are difficult to obtain within the Empire. The Empress responds with pride, explaining that she anticipated Lilith would recognize them immediately. She reveals that considerable effort was made to create an exotic atmosphere, including importing the flowers from the southern continent, along with additional elaborate decorations placed throughout the main hall to elevate the ambience of the event. Lilith continues observing the floral arrangements more closely and inquires about the specific type of flowers used. The Empress identifies them as ramunas, stating that they have been chosen as the primary decorative element for the party. At this moment, Lilith's expression changes as she becomes visibly unsettled. She carefully studies the flowers and then urgently advises that it would be best to remove all of them immediately. This reaction is not without reason. It is revealed that during the first spring after Aitana ascended to the throne as Empress, she had worked diligently to prepare a grand ceremonial party in which the fire and decorations had been considered a great success. However, during that event, an unforeseen disaster occurred. Guests suddenly began experiencing severe symptoms, including difficulty breathing and intense dizziness. The situation escalated further when a noble from the Carivaldor dukedom began suffering seizures and eventually collapsed. Notably, only guests belonging to the dukedom currently in political dispute with the empire were affected, while all other attendees remained unharmed. Because of this selective impact, suspicion immediately fell upon Empress Aitana, implicating her in the incident. However, it is later revealed that the true culprits were the Shadows, who had manipulated the situation by bribing an importer to secretly bring contaminated fire into the palace. As this past incident resurfaces in memory, tension rises once again in the present hall. The atmosphere grows uneasy as murmurs spread among the guests. Lilith's sudden insistence on removing the decorations so soon before the party is viewed by many as alarming, especially considering the immense effort the Empress had invested in preparing everything. The Empress asks what Lilith is talking about and whether she is truly suggesting that all the decorations be removed. Lilith, fully aware of the original course of events, answers without hesitation. She states that the Framanas are dangerous, explaining that they can be used as a poison. At her words, the Empress's eyes narrow slightly, her composure tightening. She then summons one of the butlers forward, the very man who had been responsible for bringing in the flowers. The man steps forward and assures the Empress with confidence that the flowers are not poisonous. He explains that they are commonly used during festivals in the southern continent, and that some people even consume them without harm. He adds that Lady Lilith must have mistaken them for a different variety. Despite his insistence, Lilith remains firm, repeating that the flowers can indeed be used as a poison. Her persistence causes the man to raise his voice, calling the claim preposterous and accusing her of attempting to slander an innocent merchant. Unmoved, Lilith turns her attention directly to him and asks whether he truly believes the flowers are harmless. Pressured and eager to prove his point, the man grabs one of the flowers and eats it, loudly declaring that no one would consume it if it were poisonous. He challenges her accusation, questioning whom she intends to have executed with such claims, implying that her youth has made her arrogant. Lilith continues calmly, explaining that in the Carrie Waldo dukedom, powdered Aurelias are used in all religious ceremonies. The people there carry the flower with them and even apply it to their bodies, believing it to be sacred. Aurelias, she explains, are non-toxic flowers that grow in the northern continent, just as Framanas grow in the southern continent without inherent toxicity. However, she emphasizes that when these two flowers are combined, they become highly poisonous. The merchant immediately shouts that her claim is a lie, but Lilith does not falter. She elaborates that the poison formed from their combination can cause severe respiratory problems and, in extreme cases, death. Given that the Carrie Waldo Duchess already suffers from a lung illness, such exposure would be especially lethal. She further points out that, under such circumstances, people might even come to believe that the Empress intended to sabotage the dukedom. The merchant continues to protest loudly, insisting that he has never heard of such a thing. Lilith then questions him again, asking whether he is truly certain of his claim. At that moment, he flinches. Lilith recognizes him clearly now, Raven, the man who, in the original story, played a role in her downfall. She knows she cannot allow someone connected to that fate to slip away. With deliberate calm, she produces a small amount of powder and instructs the merchant to swallow it. He hesitates and demands to know what it is. She explains that it is powdered Aurelias, recalling that during her days at the academy, a classmate from Carrie Waldo had given it to her as a kind of lucky charm. She remarks that she never expected to use it in such a way. She further explains that it has no taste, as Aurelias on their own are not poisonous, and urges him again to swallow it. The man quickly understands the trap. If he swallows the powder, it will react with the Framanas he has already ingested, poisoning him. Yet if he refuses, it will expose that he already knew about the deadly interaction between the two flowers. He finds himself cornered, realizing that either choice leads to ruin. Desperation flashes across his face as he considers striking her down, determined that if he must die, he will take her with him. Before he can act, however, Adrian intervenes. With swift precision, he lunges forward, tackling the man to the ground and restraining him. As the struggle ends, Adrian calls out to Lilith, ensuring her safety while the room remains tense with the weight of what has just unfolded. The merchant shouts at Adrian, demanding that he release him, his voice filled with outrage as he struggles against the firm grip restraining him. Lilith stands nearby, her heart pounding rapidly in her chest. Despite her composed exterior, the confrontation has genuinely frightened her. Adrian, maintaining control of the situation, sharply orders Jeffrey to take the man away at once and to investigate who he is working for. As the guards drag the merchant away, his protests fading into the distance, Adrian immediately turns his attention back to Lilith. He approaches her with visible concern and asks if she is all right. She assures him that she is fine, but he is still unsettled, his breathing uneven as he insists that she must leave immediately. He reminds her that she had just consumed powdered Aurelias, his worry evident as he considers the lingering Framanas pollen scattered in the air around them. He fears that she might accidentally inhale or ingest it. Lilith calmly reassures him, explaining that everything is under control. She reveals that the powder she consumed was not Aurelia's at all, but a harmless substitute. Anticipating the possibility that the merchant might not have knowingly brought the flowers, she had no intention of harming an innocent person. Instead, she used a medicine she always carries with her to stage a convincing test. In order to make it believable, she fabricated the story about receiving it as a gift from a classmate during her academy days. Judging by the outcome, her plan worked exactly as intended. Adrian looks at her with admiration and tells her that she truly is remarkable. Lilith, slightly taken aback, insists that she is not, brushing it off as a simple test that anyone could have devised. However, Adrian does not agree. He maintains that she is the only one who could have resolved the matter so effectively. His sincerity causes a faint blush to rise on her face, and she finds herself wondering if he truly means to praise her so highly. Her gaze then shifts toward the Empress. With the situation now under control, the Empress no longer has to fear losing her authority in front of the gathered nobles. The guests from the Carrie Waldo dukedom will also be safe from harm. On top of that, Lilith realizes that she has finally begun to change the course of her own fate. Yet, as these thoughts settle in her mind, an odd sensation overtakes her. Whether it is the lingering tension, her earlier fear, or simply the strain on her already fragile body, she suddenly feels weak. A wave of dizziness washes over her, and before she can steady herself, her body begins to give way. As she collapses, Adrian reacts instantly, catching her before she can hit the ground. He calls out to her urgently, his voice filled with alarm as he holds her in his arms. The scene blurs, and for a moment, everything fades. When Lilith finally regains consciousness, her vision slowly clears. The first thing she sees is a familiar face leaning over her, relief evident as she awakens, signaling that she is no longer in immediate danger. Lilith turns the small, enigmatic leaf ball over in her mind, unable to understand its presence. She is certain she had left it with the world tree, so why has it returned to her now? The question lingers, unresolved, as a knock interrupts her thoughts. Adrian enters shortly after, his expression composed yet shadowed by something heavier beneath the surface. He approaches her and gently asks how she is feeling. Lilith responds that she is fine, reasoning that she must have simply passed out. Internally, however, her thoughts remain restless, circling the possibility that Adrian might discover the truth about the leaf ball. At the same time, she notices something unusual in him, an unmistakable trace of gloom. Adrian, with a quiet weight in his voice, apologizes. Lilith is taken aback, questioning why he would apologize to her at all. He explains that he has heard everything, that as her fiancé, he should have been able to protect her better. Yet Lilith dismisses this firmly, insisting that his concern is misplaced. She claims she merely became overwhelmed and fainted on her own, emphasizing that she is now completely fine. Despite her reassurance, Adrian's reaction betrays him. His fist tightens, tension coiling in his frame. He remarks that she must still be tired and urges her to rest, then turns to leave, his departure carrying a quiet heaviness. Not long after, Gina enters, her face bright with concern. She asks Lilith if she is truly all right, and Lilith once again assures her that she is. Gina goes on to explain that after Lilith fainted, Leaf Paul had been deeply worried and refused to leave her side. She adds that the Duke had also been beside himself with concern since the previous day and had come to see her the moment she regained consciousness. This revelation unsettles Lilith. She questions whether Adrian could truly have been worried about her. In the original story, she knows, Adrian had always treated his wife with cold detachment, cheating on her and maintaining only a formal, distant relationship. There had never been warmth between them, their marriage had been nothing more than a convenience. For someone like him to feel genuine concern now seems impossible. Gina continues, mentioning that even the Empress had sent her personal palace doctor. This shocks Lilith further. The idea that the Empress would dispatch her own physician for someone like her feels implausible if rooted in genuine care. Lilith's mind sharpens with suspicion. Perhaps the Empress's true intention is to verify whether Lilith is truly ill. Given how highly she values the Ark's HD family, it would make sense if Lilith were deemed unfit to continue fulfilling her role. The Empress could accept an annulment without hesitation. With that realization, Lilith resolves to remain consistent in her behavior. Aside from the shock that caused her to faint, she believes there is nothing wrong with her. When the Duke questions the doctor directly, the physician confirms that Lilith is indeed fine, though he advises that she rest and prescribes medicine to calm her nerves. After the doctor departs, Adrian's restraint shatters. He grits his teeth and slams the door, frustration and guilt erupting in the empty space. He reflects bitterly that he brought Lilith to the palace believing she would be safest at his side, yet he not only failed to protect her, he nearly allowed her to be killed. The weight of his failure presses heavily on him, leaving him questioning his own actions and judgment. At that moment, a guard enters. Adrian immediately asks whether the captured merchant has begun speaking. The guard reports that he has not, but adds that they strongly suspect the involvement of the shadows, just as Adrian had anticipated. Adrian's expression hardens with resolve. He states that they simply need to make the man talk, and declares his intention to handle it personally. In his mind, the path forward is clear. He will eliminate every threat, every scoundrel who dares to set their sights on Lilith. Starting today, Lilith's long-awaited one-week vacation begins, and she is brimming with excitement. For once, she does not have to attend exhausting events crowded with people, and the relief feels almost unreal. It is, in her mind, the best possible outcome. Gina soon informs her that the Duke and Duchess of Carey Waldo were unharmed, and that the Empress has issued a strict order for all the Freymans to be completely eradicated, leaving not a single trace behind. The news sets a reassuring tone, and things seem to be moving in a good direction. As the atmosphere lightens, Gina's attention shifts to the small creature accompanying Lilith. She remarks that the leaf ball must truly like her. Lilith pauses at that, asking if Gina really thinks so. After all, she is certain she left it with the World Tree, so how could it have flown all the way here? Did it truly travel such a distance just to see her? Gina, amused, comments that it feels odd to keep calling it a leaf ball and suggests giving it a proper name. Lilith considers this, agreeing that something simple and easy to pronounce would be best. She asks Gina for suggestions, but Gina's answer is less than helpful. With complete seriousness, she proposes naming it by splitting its identity-leaf as a first name and Ball as a last name, or perhaps something like Mr. Ball. Lilith, thoroughly unimpressed, promptly tells her to leave. After Gina exits, the room grows quiet again. Lilith gazes at the small leaf ball and begins to question it softly. She wonders why it seems to like her so much, what it wants from her, and why it insists on staying by her side. She cannot offer it anything, she thinks certainly not love, a feeling she does not even understand how to recognize. It is not something she received in the past, nor something she feels she has now. The thought unsettles her, and she catches herself, questioning what she is even saying to such a tiny sprout. Shaking it off, she redirects her focus to naming it. As the creature lets out its familiar pee-pee sound, an idea forms. Since it always makes that noise, perhaps pee-pee would suit it as a name. The leaf ball's reaction is immediate and visibly displeased, as though it finds the suggestion utterly unacceptable. Lilith tilts her head, reconsidering, and offers Mr. Ball as an alternative. At that, the creature quickly changes its tune, eagerly repeating its pee-pee sound as if endorsing the original name instead. This reversal delights Lilith. She smiles, satisfied, convinced that she knew all along that it would like the name pee-pee. The scene then shifts to a grand ballroom, where preparations are in full splendor. This year's Pharaon is especially extravagant, clearly requiring immense effort to arrange, particularly as it is the Emperor's first time hosting such an event. The scale and elegance are undeniable. The Emperor acknowledges the success of the preparations, but the Empress responds with calm composure, attributing it all to Lady Lilith. She remarks that without Lilith's involvement, she cannot imagine what might have happened. Even the mere thought of it sends a chill down her spine. The Emperor remarks that, in that case, they owe Lilith a great deal. As the thought settles, both he and the Empress suddenly notice another presence nearby Lilith's father. It is an unusual sight, for the Duke has not attended any social gatherings since the passing of his wife. The Emperor cannot help but wonder what has brought him here tonight. The Duke stands somewhat apart, his gaze drifting here and there as though searching for someone. The Empress approaches him with composed elegance, addressing him by his title and observing that he must be looking for someone. At her words, Lilith's father steps forward and offers his greetings to the Emperor. He inquires after her well-being with polite formality, and she assures him that she remains in good health, expressing gratitude as she does so. He proceeds to congratulate her on the success of the event, noting in particular the beauty of the wisteria decorations that adorn the palace. The Empress acknowledges his compliment and explains that the credit belongs to a young Lady Lilith. Though her tone carries a certain coolness, there is an undercurrent of something more complex, hinting at a past interaction that remains unclear. She admits that, when she first brought Lilith to the palace to care for the World Tree, she held no particular expectation. Yet Lilith has far surpassed them. Even when faced with accusations of blasphemy, she stood firm in her resolve, prioritizing the protection of the World Tree above all else. Day and night, she tends to it personally, demonstrating a level of dedication that cannot be overlooked. The Empress continues, elaborating on how Lilith once inspected the flowers for the party in advance. Despite her youth and slight stature, she carried herself with a fierce assertiveness, refusing to yield her position. She stood her ground with unwavering conviction, embodying a strong sense of self-respect. That self-respect, the Empress explains, stems from her confidence in the knowledge she has cultivated within her field of expertise, as well as the skills she has honed entirely through her own efforts. More than anything, Lilith possesses an unshakable pride that compels her to uphold her responsibilities and maintain the dignity befitting a high-ranking noble. As the Empress speaks at length, it becomes apparent that such praise is not something she offers lightly. Lilith's father, however, does not appear particularly moved. His expression remains unreadable, offering little insight into his thoughts. The Empress remarks that she would not ordinarily speak so much about another person, but given the circumstances, considering that their families are soon to be joined by marriage, she finds it appropriate to do so. Her words take on a sharper edge as she adds that Lilith's dedication has reached a point where she is willing to sacrifice even her own health. At this, the Duke visibly flinches. She goes on to explain that Lilith has developed respiratory problems as a result of her efforts. However, she assures him that there is no need for excessive concern, as the palace physician is attending to her diligently and she is currently resting. Then, with a subtle shift in tone, the Empress questions whether he is worried about his daughter. Without hesitation, he denies it. The scene shifts to Lilith herself. Having slept throughout the day, she now finds herself unable to fall asleep again. Restlessness drives her from her bed, and she moves toward the balcony, opening the door to the cool night air. Before her stretches a breathtaking view, the palace grounds illuminated by countless glittering lights, the distant sounds of music drifting gently on the wind. She takes it in, thinking how beautiful it all is. Yet there is a quiet note of loneliness beneath her appreciation. It feels like a pity that she can only witness such a lovely scene by herself. Suddenly, an unexpected thought crosses her mind, the World Tree's voice, asking how long she intends to leave it alone. The memory catches her off guard, and she wonders why she is thinking of that insistent, almost bossy tree now of all times. She reassures herself that it must be doing perfectly fine without her, yet she cannot ignore the faint sense of disappointment she had sensed from it when she announced she would leave early that day. Moments later, she is no longer inside. Wrapped in her cloak, she steps out into the night. She tells herself firmly that she is not worried about the World Tree feeling lonely, certainly not. This is all part of her plan, after all, a deliberate step toward breaking off her engagement. The scene unfolds with the distant hum of a lively celebration, its echoes drifting through the air until they reach the ancient World Tree. From afar, he senses the unmistakable rhythm of festivity, laughter, movement, and the warmth of togetherness. He concludes that it must be a party, one where everyone seems to be enjoying themselves. The realization stirs something buried deep within him. Long ago, he too had known such moments. There had been a time when people gathered around him, adorning his vast branches with decorations, their presence filling his existence with a quiet but undeniable joy. Now, however, that time feels impossibly distant, replaced by an overwhelming stillness that only emphasizes his solitude. This loneliness drives him to question the God who created him. He wonders why he has been placed in such isolation, why no one is allowed to come near him anymore. The boredom gnaws at him, heavy and unrelenting. In response, the God explains that this separation exists for his own protection, that there are countless threats in the world from which he must be shielded. The explanation, though logical, does little to comfort him. Instead, it sparks another thought: if he must be protected so carefully, then he must be special. The God confirms this without hesitation, affirming that he is indeed extraordinary. This affirmation swells within the World Tree, quickly transforming into pride. He begins to reassure himself, almost forcefully, that he is the greatest being in existence. The laughter and chatter of humans, which once held meaning for him, now become insignificant in his mind. He insists that their joy has nothing to do with him, that their lives and celebrations are beneath his notice. He declares, both outwardly and inwardly, that he is not lonely, not even in the slightest. Yet beneath this insistence, an unspoken contradiction lingers. His thoughts drift to a particular human, Jeffrey, who had come to him earlier. The memory resurfaces vividly. Jeffrey had pleaded desperately, asking for help so that Lilith could fully recover. There had been genuine fear in him, a trembling urgency as he spoke of the commander, whose presence was so terrifying that it seemed capable of claiming lives through sheer intimidation. Jeffrey had begged the World Tree to ensure that Lady Lilith would awaken in good health. That plea, earnest and fragile, still echoes faintly in the World Tree's mind. He recalls, too, how many humans had come by just yesterday and even today, each one carrying wishes and hopes, offering them up in quiet reverence. Among them, Lilith had stood out. She had said she would return tomorrow, yet he finds himself doubting the reliability of such promises. Humans are unpredictable, fleeting in both word and action. A thought arises: perhaps she is ill. The possibility unsettles him more than he expects. Another question follows immediately: why had she seemed to fade? The memory of her condition lingers uneasily. A strange impulse takes hold of him, one that urges him to go and check on her himself. Yet the very notion clashes with his pride. He stops himself, almost sharply, questioning what he is even thinking. He reminds himself that he is the great world tree, an existence far above humankind. Their struggles, their conditions, their very lives should mean nothing to him. He tells himself that humans can do as they please, that their fate holds no significance in his vast, ancient existence. Even so, the thought refuses to disappear entirely. Then, without warning, the present shifts. Lilith appears before him, her presence quiet yet unmistakable. She reaches out and touches him, her gesture gentle, almost familiar, as though testing whether he is awake. The world tree reacts with immediate confusion, his thoughts abruptly thrown into disarray. The suddenness of her arrival unsettles him, and he instinctively questions her actions, rejecting the idea that she has any right to concern herself with him. At the same time, another thought surfaces beneath his outward reaction, sharp, fleeting, and tinged with unease. He wonders if she might have heard everything he had been thinking just moments ago. He comes to the conclusion that she must have made her way here because she had been buried, and in his mind, she should have known better than to approach him so casually. Lilith, however, acknowledges the situation with calm acceptance. She recognizes his point and expresses a quiet apology for disturbing him, making it clear that she intends to leave without causing further inconvenience. Yet before she can go, he stops her. The reason surfaces almost instinctively: he does not want to be alone. Though he does not openly admit it, the thought presses forward strongly enough that he calls her back. Attempting to compose himself, he shifts the topic and mentions that he has heard she was sick. His tone carries an odd mix of curiosity and stiffness, as though he is trying to sound detached while still seeking confirmation. Lilith immediately questions where he could have heard such information. The question catches him off guard. For a brief moment, he finds himself at a loss, unable to produce a proper explanation. If it were to become known that knights sometimes sneak in to beg him to grant their wishes, it would only reinforce the restrictions placed upon him, ensuring that no one would ever be allowed to approach him again. The risk of exposure unsettles him. In response, he raises his voice with forced authority, declaring that he is the great world tree and that such knowledge is simply something he possesses. It is an attempt to cover his hesitation with pride, to re-establish control over the situation. Lilith, however, perceives more than what he says aloud. It becomes evident to her that he is concealing something. Instead of pressing further, she lowers herself slightly and speaks with understanding. She suggests that he does not have to answer if he does not wish to, acknowledging that everyone carries secrets they are unwilling to share. She adds that this applies to him as well, gently reassuring him without demanding honesty. Though she does not know his past, she assumes that he must have his own reasons for being cautious around people. The world tree reacts sharply to her words, a flicker of defensiveness rising within him. He questions what someone like her could possibly understand about his circumstances. To him, she is merely a human, limited, fleeting, and incapable of grasping the weight of his existence. Lilith does not argue. Instead, she concedes the point, admitting that she may be making assumptions. She withdraws her statement without resistance, allowing the tension to settle. Shifting her attention, she remarks that the view is beautiful, directing the conversation towards something simpler and more neutral. The world tree, still unsettled, asks why she did not attend the party. It seems strange to him that someone would choose solitude over celebration. Lilith explains that she has spent enough time among crowds and finds that she prefers being here instead. Her answer prompts further curiosity within him, leading him to wonder why she dislikes being surrounded by people. Her response carries a quiet weight. She admits that she does not fully know, but her life has always been defined by isolation. She has never truly had anyone by her side. Even her own father withheld affection, blaming her for her mother's death during childbirth. The servants, following the example set by the head of the household, refused to show her any respect. She grew up as a child rejected by her own family, her existence treated as something unwelcome. As her life progressed, that pattern of rejection continued. She was essentially traded into a loveless marriage, her agency disregarded. Worse still, she was falsely accused of a crime she did not commit, a situation that ultimately led to her death at the hands of others. Even after she broke free from that engagement and entered the academy in pursuit of becoming a horticulturist hoping to change her fate, very little truly changed. The people around her, including individuals like Adrian or Aitana, sought her out not for who she was, but for the knowledge she possessed. She states plainly that she is accustomed to being alone. It is something she has learned to endure. Yet despite that acceptance, there are moments when a quiet thought emerges, an unfulfilled wish. She finds herself thinking that it would be nice to share a beautiful view like this with someone else. That simple desire is what brought her here. In response, the world tree reaches out and lightly taps her. The gesture surprises her, making her wonder if he is attempting, in his own way, to comfort her. There is something almost awkward about it, as though he is unfamiliar with such expressions but trying nonetheless. Then he speaks of himself hesitantly at first, before clarifying. He reveals his name, Yggdrasil, allowing her to call him by a shortened form if she prefers. The act of sharing his name carries quiet significance, a small but meaningful step toward openness. Lilith smiles at this, her expression softening. She begins to wonder if this moment marks the beginning of something new, if perhaps they can be considered friends now. The thought brings a gentle warmth to her demeanor. Wanting to commemorate this newfound connection, she asks if he could grow some flowers for her. The response comes immediately and without hesitation. He refuses. The next day unfolds with a quiet yet restless energy as Lilith makes her way toward the World Tree. In her thoughts, she cannot help but grumble about the World Tree's behavior. She reflects with mild irritation that she had believed they had grown somewhat closer, perhaps even to the point of friendship, yet despite that, it continues to command her as though she were nothing more than a subordinate. A soft sigh escapes her as she continues walking, her mind drifting to the ongoing festival. She is well aware that everyone is occupied with preparations and responsibilities, but even so, she finds herself wishing that the construction of the rainwater storage facility would be completed more quickly. A faint sense of urgency lingers within her, as she feels that rain may arrive soon. Because of this, she considers seeking out Sir Geoffrey, thinking that perhaps with his influence, he could pressure the workers to hasten their progress. However, her train of thought is abruptly interrupted when she notices Arian standing before her. Her eyes widen in surprise as she takes in his presence, and he greets her with a gentle smile. She questions his reason for being there, while he responds by turning the question back on her, noting that it is still quite early in the morning and suggesting that she ought to be resting instead. Lilith explains that she is on her way to meet Sir Geoffrey, which immediately causes a subtle shift in Arian's demeanor as he expresses disappointment and questions why she wishes to see him again. She clarifies that she merely intends to ask for a favor, but Arian quickly interjects, insisting that she could instead ask him. Lilith hesitates, reasoning that he must be busy due to the festival, yet he firmly assures her that he is entirely free. Even as she insists that he must have responsibilities, he continues to reassure her otherwise. Gradually, she concedes that there is indeed something she would like to request of him. Before she can elaborate, the sky suddenly darkens and a heavy rain begins to pour. Arian immediately recognizes the suddenness of the storm and suggests that they find shelter. Without hesitation, he places his cloak over Lilith to shield her from the rain, guiding her toward a nearby pavilion. By the time they reach cover, both of them are damp from the downpour. Standing close together beneath the shelter, Arian expresses concern for her condition, noticing how thoroughly she has been drenched. As he attempts to brush away the rainwater from her, his attention falters when he realizes just how close they are. A deep blush spreads across his face, and he quickly turns away, flustered by the proximity. Lilith, noticing his unusual reaction, questions him with curiosity, while he insists that nothing is wrong. Yet her concern prompts her to lean in closer, observing that he seems unusually warm and wondering whether the rain has caused it. Internally, Arian finds himself overwhelmed by her nearness, thinking that in this moment she resembles something as delicate and enchanting as a sugar plum fairy. However, he realizes that he must regain composure and subtly shifts the conversation. He recalls hearing that she had been the one to suggest a replacement for the Framinus. Lilith acknowledges this, explaining that the situation has now been resolved. Arian continues, mentioning that the minister of the Imperial Procurement Department had informed him that she not only suggested wisterias but also provided guidance on how quickly they could be obtained. Lilith admits that she had hoped to keep her involvement hidden, though it appears that information has already spread. When Arian questions her reasoning, she explains that she believed those responsible for the Framina incident should be given an opportunity to redeem themselves rather than face expulsion. She reveals that she deliberately allowed the officials involved to receive the credit, so that innocent individuals would not suffer consequences for an issue she merely brought to light. Her intention had never been to see people punished, but rather to prevent harm and avoid the possibility of conflict, particularly with the Carvi Waldo dukedom. Despite having played a crucial role in preventing such a disaster, she had quietly carried a sense of guilt. Arian listens intently, deeply moved by her words and her selflessness. In his thoughts, he reflects on how she continues to remain unchanged, still embodying the same kindness and compassion that once defined her. This realization stirs something within him, and he finds himself drawn to her once more, feeling as though he is falling for her all over again. Lilith, however, is taken aback by his admiration, interpreting it as light-hearted teasing rather than sincerity. Eventually, the rain subsides, and Lilith continues on her path until she reaches the World Tree. Upon her arrival, she is met with an unexpected display of agitation as the World Tree throws something akin to a tantrum, questioning the unfamiliar substance that has appeared. Lilith calmly asks whether it is satisfied, pointing out that the task has been accomplished. The World Tree attributes the success to her intervention, believing that her pressure had yielded results. However, Lilith coughs slightly and corrects this assumption, explaining that the work was completed due to the rainfall rather than any influence she exerted. Her cough does not go unnoticed. The World Tree quickly questions whether she has fallen ill. Lilith dismisses the concern, insisting that it is merely a slight cough caused by being caught in the rain. She emphasizes that she does not have a fever and is not sick, suggesting that she should proceed with her duties. Yet before she can continue, the World Tree stops her. It insists, somewhat defensively, that it is not concerned for her well-being as a human, but rather wishes to avoid the inconvenience of catching her illness. Despite its words, its actions betray a different intent as it begins to channel magic toward her. Startled by this sudden action, Lilith reacts with alarm, her voice rising in surprise as she questions what it is doing. Lilith suddenly finds herself standing in an entirely unfamiliar place, her surroundings shifting so abruptly that she cannot immediately comprehend what has happened. She looks around in confusion, her gaze scanning every direction, yet there is no one nearby who might offer an explanation. A surge of irritation rises within her, and she mentally curses the overbearing World Tree, declaring that this time she truly intends to turn it into firewood. If its intention had been to have her treated, then it should have sent her directly to the palace. Instead, it has dropped her unceremoniously into the middle of the capital, leaving her stranded and disoriented. Her thoughts continue to spiral as she reflects on the absurdity of the situation. What troubles her even more is the realization that the World Tree had used such advanced, high-class magic to transport her, which only deepens her confusion about why it would choose such an inconvenient destination. Now she is left to figure out how to return to the palace on her own. To make matters worse, she is not even properly dressed, having been in the middle of her work when she was transported. She carries nothing that could prove her identity, wealth, or status, leaving her in a particularly vulnerable position. Determined to find a solution, she decides that her best course of action is to head toward the main road and attempt to secure a ride on a cargo wagon. She reasons that if she can reach the Ashdod family townhouse, someone there will surely recognize her and arrange for a return to the palace. However, as she moves forward, she is abruptly confronted by an overwhelming crowd. Her eyes widen as she takes in the sheer number of people, and she realizes that they are all gathered for the spring festival during the Fiorean season. The streets are packed to the point that even moving becomes a challenge. With a sense of frustration, she acknowledges that finding a wagon in such conditions is impossible. The crowd is so dense that she cannot even push her way through. Recognizing that this approach will not work, she decides that for now, she must seek shelter somewhere away from the chaos. As she steps aside, isolated from the throng, a wave of dissatisfaction washes over her. The situation feels utterly inconvenient, and she resigns herself to waiting until the crowd begins to thin. Just then, a sudden commotion erupts nearby. Voices rise in alarm as someone shouts about the presence of shadow monsters, drawing attention to a figure with striking red eyes. Fear spreads quickly among the people, and their reactions grow increasingly hostile. They hurl insults, calling the figure a filthy rebel and demanding that he leave, questioning how he dares to appear in such a place. The hostility is palpable, and Lilith cannot ignore it. Her thoughts turn to history as she recalls the tale from 1,000 years ago, when the Right Hun betrayed the Empire's first emperor, Conrad, and attempted to assassinate him. As punishment, they were cursed with red eyes for eternity. Officially, the Empire still recognizes them as citizens, yet in reality, they are ostracized and treated with suspicion and hatred. Many people harbor resentment toward them, especially those who have lost loved ones to the Shadow faction. Yet Lilith knows that only a small number among them are truly part of those shadows, while the majority are innocent individuals forced to bear the consequences of a long-forgotten betrayal. Her attention is drawn back to the present as one of the citizens spits at the figure, cruelly telling him to leave and accusing him of ruining the festival. The man does not respond. He endures the insults in silence, his stillness suggesting either restraint or an inability to react. Lilith studies him more closely and begins to suspect that he may be unwell. Despite her initial reluctance to involve herself, she feels a growing sense of unease at the thought of ignoring someone who is clearly struggling. Unable to walk away, she steps forward, calling out as she approaches. She uses the pretense of requesting water, attempting to create an opportunity to intervene without escalating the situation. The scene shifts to the hooded figure, who appears to be barely holding himself together, his body seemingly unresponsive to his will. Lilith approaches him cautiously, preparing to speak, but before she can do so, he suddenly raises a dagger toward her. The abrupt movement startles her, yet she maintains her composure and urges him to calm down, assuring him that she has no intention of harming him. She gently asks him to lower the weapon. The hooded man studies her for a moment, his gaze lingering as though trying to discern her intentions. Lilith begins to question whether she has made a mistake in approaching him. However, before anything further can happen, the man loses his balance entirely and collapses. Acting on instinct, she catches him, supporting his weight as she asks if he is all right. As they find themselves in close proximity, she notices his features more clearly. His red eyes, pale skin, and strikingly handsome face stand out vividly. A thought crosses her mind, recalling how a certain figure named Raven had been described in a novel with similar traits. Yet she quickly dismisses the idea, reasoning that it would make no sense for the Chief of the Shadows and the Empire's most wanted criminal to be wandering openly through the capital in broad daylight. Moreover, such physical traits are not unique to one individual, as all Raitun share these characteristics. She reminds herself that it would be unreasonable to jump to such conclusions. She remarks that he appears unwell, but his response is unexpected. He suddenly grasps her hand and questions whether she knows how to use mana. This abrupt shift unsettles her deeply. Just moments ago, he seemed weak and on the verge of collapse, yet now he appears alert, almost unnervingly so. Her mind races with suspicion, wondering whether he is unstable or even dangerous. She questions his intentions, considering the possibility that he may be deceitful or harbor ill motives. His insistence on asking about mana only adds to her unease. As he presses her for an answer, she hesitates, unsure of how to respond. But before she can say anything, her instincts take over. She abruptly pushes him away, creating distance between them. In a swift motion, she grabs a nearby shovel, her expression hardening with resolve. Convinced that he poses a threat, she accuses him of being a deceitful pervert and, without hesitation, swings the shovel at him, striking him with force. She thinks that now is her chance to make a run for it, yet the sight before her halts every instinct to flee. The man stands completely unscathed. Not a single trace of injury remains on him, not even the faintest sign that anything had happened at all. A tremor runs through her, subtle at first but quickly growing stronger, curling into her chest and tightening her breath. Why is he perfectly fine? The question echoes in her mind, heavy and suffocating. In that moment, she knows with painful clarity that she is completely and utterly at his mercy. The man speaks, his voice calm, almost gentle, a sharp contrast to the storm raging inside her. He tells her that he was not trying to scare her. He apologizes. The words catch her off guard, unraveling her fear just enough to let confusion slip in. She hesitates, her thoughts stumbling over themselves. Wait, is he not a creep after all? The idea feels strange, unfamiliar, yet oddly reassuring. She quickly responds, her voice carrying a trace of awkwardness as she apologizes as well. She tells him she is sorry for hitting him, especially when he is ill. There is a brief pause before she reaches out, offering him the water she had been holding. She explains that she had actually followed him just to give him this. She admits that she does not have any medicine for him, and so she thought that the least she could do to help was to bring him some water. The man looks at her for a while, his gaze steady, almost as if he is trying to read something deeper within her. Then, after that quiet moment stretches just enough to feel significant, he simply thanks her. She immediately brushes it off, telling him that it is nothing, that it is just some water. But before she can say anything more, a cough escapes her. It interrupts her abruptly, forcing her to bring a hand to her mouth. She frowns slightly, wondering if she is coughing again because she is nervous, or if something else is wrong. Without a word, the man reaches into his pocket and hands her something. It is a handkerchief. Lilith takes it, a small flicker of surprise passing through her eyes before she thanks him. There is a brief silence between them, one that feels less tense than before yet still carries an unspoken weight. Then, unexpectedly, the man asks if they can meet again sometime. The question lingers in the air. Lilith tilts her head slightly, puzzled. She wonders aloud whether they would ever even have a reason to meet again. He answers without hesitation. There will be a reason. He is sure of it. Before she can question him further, a faint murmur reaches her ears. It is distant, indistinct, like a whisper carried by the wind. She instinctively glances back, her attention drawn toward the source of the sound. But when she turns forward again, he is gone. There is no trace of him left behind. No footsteps, no lingering presence, nothing to suggest he had been standing there just moments ago. Lilith stares at the empty space, confusion knitting her brows together as she wonders where he could have gone. Shaking off the lingering unease, she steps out of the narrow street. The open space beyond feels brighter, louder, more real. And then Adrian's voice cuts through everything. He calls out to her, urgency laced in every syllable. Within moments, he is rushing toward her, his steps quick and unsteady with worry. He reaches her and immediately begins asking if she is all right, if she is hurt anywhere. Lilith reassures him, telling him that she is fine. There is no injury, nothing to be concerned about. Then, curiosity surfaces as she asks him how he even knew she was here. Adrian explains that he received a report. Someone had seen a person who looked like her falling out of a random portal in this area. After hearing that, he tracked down the portal's mana signature. That was how he confirmed that she had ended up somewhere around here. However, despite all his efforts, he admits that he could not figure out anything beyond that. His words settle in the air between them, grounding the moment back into reality, yet leaving behind the lingering mystery of the man who had vanished without a trace. He apologizes, saying that he is sorry it took him so long to find her. Lilith weighs it off, telling him that she was a bit surprised, but she is completely fine. Her tone is light, almost casual, as if nothing unusual has happened. Then Adrian's gaze shifts, catching sight of the handkerchief in her hand. His expression changes ever so slightly as he asks her about it. Lilith explains that she was coughing, so a passerby gave it to her. He pauses for a moment before asking if it was a young man. She replies that it is. Adrian continues, his questions coming one after another, each one sharper than the last. He asks if the man was handsome. Lilith thinks for a second before answering that she supposes he was. A faint smile forms on Adrian's lips, though there is something unreadable beneath it. He asks if the man bothered her, or said that he wanted to see her again. Lilith nods, confirming that he did. At that, Adrian lets out a small, quiet breath before reaching into his pocket and taking out his own handkerchief. He holds it out to her, telling her to throw the other one away and use his instead. He adds that the one she has could be dirty. Lilith looks at the handkerchief in her hand and says that it does not look dirty to her. But Adrian insists. He tells her that, actually, he is sure it has been contaminated with a virus. Lilith blinks, slightly taken aback by his certainty. Then she shrugs lightly and says that if he says so, then all right. Internally, she cannot help but think that he is unusually sensitive when it comes to health and hygiene. With that settled, Adrian asks if they should return to the palace. Lilith agrees. She admits that she is a bit tired after everything that has happened and the conversation she just had. As she starts walking ahead, Adrian remains where he is for a moment. His expression shifts, the softness disappearing as something colder takes its place. Jeffrey approaches him quietly. Adrian speaks in a low voice, instructing Jeffrey to find that man and bring him to him. The scene shifts. Lilith stands before the world tree once again. Today is the day she has decided she will turn that bratty tree into firewood. It needs to be taught a proper lesson. As she steps closer, she frowns slightly. The ground beneath her feet feels damp. She looks around, confused, wondering why the ground is so wet again. Then she notices it. The world tree is crying. She stares for a moment before asking him why he is crying right now. The world tree suddenly shouts in disbelief, asking what the hell she is alive? Lilith raises an eyebrow and tells him that of course she is alive. Did he really think she would die or something? The tree stumbles over his words, mentioning the portal and the coordinates. Lilith crosses her arms and says, almost smugly, that so he does admit it was his fault. She tilts her head, narrowing her eyes slightly as she studies him. No way. Was he crying because of that? Because he thought she might have died? She asks him why he has gone quiet again. The world tree hesitates before asking if she is not mad at him. Seeing the usually arrogant and overbearing tree so downcast makes it strangely difficult for her to respond. The anger she had brought with her begins to fade, replaced by something softer. In the end, she simply tells him that it is fine. She explains that he did it because he was worried about her health. There was some trouble, yes, but she came back in one piece. Then, after a brief pause, she even thanks him for worrying about her. The world tree starts apologizing again, saying that he had poor control over his mana since he had not used it in ages, and that he did not mean for things to turn out that way. Lilith blinks in surprise. Did she hear that right? She can hardly believe that the world tree is apologizing to her. It feels almost surreal. She thinks that maybe he felt anxious because he made a mistake, even though he is supposed to be some almighty being. When she looks at him like that, he almost seems like a little kid. Then again, she immediately catches herself. What is she even thinking? This tree has probably been alive for thousands of years. She sighs softly and tells him that she is fine, so he should not be too hard on himself. Then, with a slight smirk, she adds that he is much more suited to being a bossy brat. The world tree pauses before asking if she is trying to comfort him or criticize him. Lilith answers without hesitation that she is, of course, comforting him. The scene shifts once more. The man from before walks calmly, his presence blending into the shadows as if he belongs there. Someone approaches him, asking if he is all right. He replies that he is fine. He takes his seat, his movements composed and effortless. The moment he settles, someone addresses him as chief. Others gather, their voices filled with respect and reverence as they welcome him back. They call him the King of the Shadows. One of the men asks him how he is feeling, noting that his symptoms of mana reflux had looked quite severe. Raven replies that he is fine. After all, he does not lose to anyone when it comes to magic. At least, there was a time when he truly believed that, but then there is Arkshad. Arkshad is able to wield Blade Aura, something that had previously been considered possible only in theory. That single fact allows him to ascend to the level of a sword master, and it is in that moment that Raven realizes something crucial. If he wishes to stand against such power, he too must obtain something capable of countering Blade Aura. It does not matter if that power is forbidden. Even if he must break taboos to attain it, he does not hesitate. For the sake of avenging the Raitans, he would make the same choice 1,000 times over. Yet something unexpected has occurred. After that girl touches him, his mana reflux simply stops. Ever since he began dabbling in black magic, he has endured endless, excruciating pain. It had become a constant, an unavoidable consequence of the path he chose. And now, suddenly, that pain is gone. Completely gone. He cannot help but wonder who that girl was. Even in the middle of the festival, she had stood out. Her appearance had been unusual, as though she had just come from somewhere far away. She seemed frail, her condition poor, coughing as if her body could barely endure the strain placed upon it. And yet, despite all of that, he finds himself unable to take his eyes off her. The thought lingers longer than he would like. Deciding that this line of thinking is pointless, he forces it aside and instead turns his attention to his men, asking how much progress they have made in uncovering Adrian's weaknesses. On the other side, Lilith is fast asleep beneath the world tree, her breathing soft and steady. Adrian approaches quietly, his gaze falling on her resting figure. He wonders if she is truly asleep and thinks that she will catch a cold if she continues sleeping out here like this. Without hesitation, he bends down and gently lifts her into his arms. From above, the world tree observes the scene with quiet interest. It had never seen this side of Adrian before. Prior to Lilith's arrival, Adrian had always carried a cold, distant expression, one that kept everyone at arm's length. But now, as he holds her, there is a softness to him, a warmth that had never been there before. He looks happy. The world tree begins to think that perhaps Lilith is not just someone it needs, but someone Adrian needs as well. Adrian is the Knight Commander, bound by duty to protect the world tree, unable to leave the capital no matter what. But if the two of them were to be together, if they were to marry, then everything would fall into place perfectly. Everyone would be happy. With that thought, the world tree grows rather pleased with itself, deciding that it will take on the role of Cupid. After all, they should consider themselves honored. And so, beneath the quiet glow of the last day of the spring festival, plans begin to take root. Lilith is already dressed and prepared as she turns to Gina, asking her not to stare, insisting that this is all a bit too much. Gina, however, remains firm, explaining that the dress is a gift from the Empress herself, and therefore Lilith must wear it exactly as it is. Lilith cannot help but think that she understands it was the Empress who chose it, but that does not make it any less overwhelming. Just 2 days ago, she had received several gifts from the Empress. At the time, the Empress had casually remarked that Lilith could use whichever one she liked least as a foot rag or something of the sort, especially mentioning the Lily of the Valley dress in particular. Now, as Lilith looks around, she realizes that every single dress is extravagantly designed. One is a striking shade of red, bold, and impossible to ignore, while another is at least a more modest color blue, but even that one feels far too showy. She wonders if she really needs to attend the party dressed like this at all. Honestly, she would much rather remain in her room and avoid the entire affair. Gina asks her to stand straight, reminding her that today is the last and most important day of the festival. It would be completely unacceptable for a member of one of the 4 ducal houses to be absent without a proper reason. Just then, a knock sounds at the door, followed by a voice asking for permission to enter. The door opens, and Adrian steps inside. The moment he sees Lilith, fully dressed, he freezes slightly, a faint blush creeping onto his face. He begins to comment on the dress, but before he can finish, Lilith explains that it was a gift from the Empress. He recovers quickly and tells her that it suits her perfectly, that she looks truly beautiful. Lilith thanks him, and he adds that he has brought a gift as well. She looks at him with curiosity, asking what it is. He presents it to her, explaining that it is a Lily of the Valley necklace. He is quick to add that it does not carry any special meaning, rather, he simply realized that he had never given her a proper gift before, despite being her fiancé. Lilith responds that she will wear the necklace tonight. Adrian then asks, somewhat hesitantly, if she would allow him to put it on her. She agrees, saying that she would be grateful. As he moves behind her and carefully fastens the necklace around her neck, he cannot help but notice how delicate she is, fair, slender, and almost fragile. For a brief moment, she takes his breath away. Lilith suddenly remarks on the coincidence, noting that there are lilies of the valley embroidered on her dress as well. She adds that he and the Empress must share similar tastes, given that they are siblings. Her words trigger a memory. In the past, Adrian had approached his sister, asking her to send that very dress to Lilith, but to present it as though it were a gift from the Empress herself. The Empress had questioned him, asking why he did not simply give it to Lilith directly. Adrian had replied that while he did wish to give her something, he was concerned that gifting a dress might feel too burdensome, especially when they were not yet married. The Empress had then remarked that Adrian clearly had no sense of fashion, suggesting that Lilith would look far better in a red dress. Adrian had immediately objected, insisting that no, his sister was simply obsessed with the color red. The memory fades as the present returns. Lilith looks at him and asks why he is smiling like that. He answers that he has simply recalled something amusing. A moment later, Lilith glances at the time and realizes how late it is. She quickly says that they should hurry. And with that, the two of them prepare to leave together for the final event of the festival. Finally, the two of them arrive at the grand ballroom. Lilith quietly wonders how long it has been since she last attended an official event. In truth, this might be the very first time since she was confined and kept away from society. Aiden surveys the surroundings with a measured gaze and remarks that the ballroom is remarkably beautiful, noting that she must possess a truly refined eye to have chosen such an appearance for the occasion. At last, their entrance is formally announced. As Lilith steps in beside him, the attention of the crowd shifts almost instantly toward them. A ripple of murmurs spreads across the hall. Several guests begin to whisper among themselves, questioning whether she is truly the person they believe her to be, the young lady standing beside the Duke. It is, after all, the first time she has ever been seen attending an event of this scale. Many had heard that she had been gravely ill, so much so that she could not even rise from her bed. Others recall the rumors claiming that the engagement between the two had been called off. The whispers grow more layered and speculative. Some remark that they had once heard she avoided appearing in high society because she was exceedingly unattractive. Yet now, seeing her in person, she appears nothing like those exaggerated rumors. To them, she looks rather ordinary, perhaps even average, but clearly someone who has put considerable effort into her appearance. Still, a few cannot help but compare her to the Duke, whose striking presence only emphasizes the contrast in their minds. Lilith hears these murmurs without difficulty. However, instead of reacting with discomfort, she lets out a faint, almost amused chuckle within herself. Compared to the harsh words she had endured while growing up, these shallow judgments barely register. They fail to leave any real impact on her composure. On the other hand, Adrian observes the situation with a more guarded awareness. He quietly suggests that if she prefers, they could leave at once, assuring her that he can manage everything else on his own. However, Lilith calmly reassures him that she is perfectly fine. She understands that this is her first official appearance in high society after such a long absence, and under such circumstances, rumors and speculation are only natural. There is no reason for her to be unsettled by something so predictable. Despite her calm response, Adrian remains somewhat insistent, his concern not entirely eased. At that moment, a new presence steps forward, interrupting the subtle tension. A young woman approaches Adrian with familiarity, expressing her concern over not having seen him for several days and admitting that she had grown worried. As Lilith observes this newcomer, a quiet realization forms in her mind. She recognizes the timing of this appearance, recalling that this encounter aligns precisely with events she remembers. The young woman is Chloe, the noble lady who, in the original narrative, is closely connected to Adrian as his lover. She is the young lady of House Myers, a family of significant influence, powerful enough to rival even the most prominent houses of the empire, despite not being counted among the 4 ducal families. She had heard that Chloe held a respectable position within high society, someone who was generally regarded with approval and recognition among noble circles. Yet despite that outward reputation, she is nonetheless overwhelmed by an unsettling sense of inferiority whenever she finds herself in Lilith's presence. Acting on that insecurity, Chloe steps forward once again toward Adrian, insisting that his cravat appears slightly unadjusted and requesting permission to fix it herself. However, Adrian immediately stops her, firmly instructing her not to touch him. His tone leaves no room for persistence, cutting off her movement at once. The surrounding nobles observe the exchange with quiet amusement and judgment, the same type of shameless behavior that often surfaces in such gatherings. Some of them are accustomed to watching young noble women attempt to attract attention by lingering around influential men, even while subtly mocking others in the process. It is not unfamiliar to Lilith, who has endured similar situations before in the company of her own acquaintances. In the past, such scenes would have left her with a lingering emotional discomfort, though she now maintains a more composed exterior. Chloe turns her attention toward Lilith and remarks that such behavior will only result in ridicule for Adrian, questioning whether Lilith herself cannot see that consequence. Since Lilith's original intention had been to eventually dissolve her engagement with Adrian, Chloe assumes that Lilith would agree without resistance. Unexpectedly, Lilith responds in quiet affirmation, acknowledging the statement in a manner that does not oppose her. Emboldened, Chloe continues speaking, declaring that Lilith is not even capable of properly managing simple matters such as Adrian's attire and therefore is unfit to hold the position of his fiancé. She once again reaches out toward Adrian, only for him to swiftly pull his hand away from her grasp, repeating firmly that he has already told her not to touch him. The rejection leaves Chloe visibly shaken, her confidence beginning to fracture as desperation sets in. Adrian further clarifies that his cravat is already perfectly arranged, emphasizing that it was tied by his fiancée, Lilith, herself. This statement causes Chloe to flush deeply with embarrassment. She immediately withdraws and turns her face away, offering a hurried apology as her composure collapses under the weight of the moment. Lilith watches the exchange with quiet detachment, not having expected the situation to unfold in such a manner. Adrian then turns toward her and suggests that they should move somewhere quieter to rest for a while, offering to guide her away from the crowd. Lilith gently replies that the party has only just begun. At that moment, however, another presence steps between them, interrupting the exchange. A man speaks with a confident air, drawing attention as he addresses Adrian directly and proceeds to greet him. Adrian returns the greeting with respect, recognizing him as Duke Carey Waldo. The Duke dismisses formalities and immediately expresses his intention to speak with Adrian, stating that he has many questions for the renowned sword master. Adrian lightly squeezes Lilith's hand in reassurance. Lilith, in turn, assures him that she is fine and encourages him to go with the Duke. She suggests that they can always share a dance later and that she will simply rest for a while. She reasons that the Duke should not be kept waiting on her account, and therefore she willingly steps back to allow Adrian to proceed. With that understanding, she withdraws from the ballroom. Now alone, Lilith finds herself in the garden outside the venue. The quiet atmosphere allows her to finally breathe more easily. Only then does she fully realize how overwhelming the earlier gathering had been. During the entirety of the Phaeorian period, her reputation within society had been far from favorable, and being present in such a setting brings those memories into sharper contrast. However, this time, the situation feels different. Duke Carey Waldo is alive and in good health, and there is no looming threat of an imminent war destabilizing the empire. The people inside the ballroom are enjoying themselves without fear or tension. Observing this, Lilith begins to understand how much the course of events has already changed from the original narrative she once knew. With this realization, she finds herself briefly contemplating a peaceful future, perhaps even an early retirement and a quiet life in her later years. For the first time, the possibility of a simple, uneventful existence feels within reach, as though she is one step closer to a normal life. However, before that thought can settle, a faint voice breaks the silence, calling someone useless. Lilith pauses, sensing tension nearby, and realizes that a confrontation is unfolding. From a distance, she hears Chloe's father angrily berating her, accusing her of failing to attract Adrian's attention and stating that this was their only opportunity to establish a connection with him. Chloe's voice rises in frustration as she insists that she was making progress, only for Adrian's fiancé to appear and ruin everything. The argument escalates, with her father sharply silencing her, criticizing her appearance and efforts, and striking her in anger, declaring that she has become nothing but a disgrace. Lilith, witnessing this from afar, instinctively feels that such treatment is wrong, especially the act of striking someone in the face. Although she knows she should not involve herself in matters unrelated to her, a small sound escapes her, revealing her discomfort. The brief interruption causes Chloe's father to realize that someone may have overheard them, and he quickly changes his tone, insisting that Chloe must still succeed regardless, warning her not to be outshone by someone who was once cast aside by her own family, and reminding her not to disappoint him further. After he leaves, Chloe remains alone, standing in silence. Lilith considers quietly leaving the area to avoid being noticed, thinking that no one would wish to be seen in such a situation. However, just as she prepares to move away, Chloe approaches her and directly asks whether she finds her pathetic. Lilith grows visibly uneasy the moment she realizes that Chloe has found her hiding place. A wave of tension settles over her shoulders as Chloe approaches with a sharp, mocking curiosity. Chloe questions why Lilith had been hiding, suggesting with clear sarcasm that perhaps Lilith intended to laugh at her from concealment. Lilith reacts immediately, denying the accusation at once, insisting that such thoughts had never crossed her mind. Yet Chloe remains unconvinced, her tone dripping with bitterness as she accuses Lilith of being insincere and urges her to show honesty for once. Chloe continues, voicing her resentment openly. She assumes that Lilith must secretly look down on her after all. Lilith had left her noble household and entered the academy, choosing to study a field associated with peasants, such as horticulture. In Chloe's eyes, Lilith has always lived as she pleased, making choices freely without resistance. Because of this, Chloe believes Lilith must view her as pitiful, someone forced to struggle desperately just to obtain the very things that Lilith herself had received with what Chloe bitterly calls barely any effort. The phrase barely any effort lingers heavily in Lilith's mind,